Тебе умную Богородице, ты же смотри ветхими, я же был отроки, спаситель превозносимый, и отдали во чреве Твоем сердце, хвалятся Боги препрославлен. Помилуй меня, Боже, помилуй меня. Божественное синее, владыца Влайси, яко зачевший во чреве и родшийся в плоти единым непорочным, тем же нас избави страстей, болезней, скорбей и долгу, ибо имаше крепость и силу новую. Помилуй меня, Боже, помилуй меня, устами чистая болезнь, нестерпимая, преокаянная моя душе, радость единственная владыца, владычица, подающий, расшавший движение моих ноги к мутную луну, святом месте прибежище и избавление. Слава Господи, Христу Твоему честному, спасительному древу, поклониться Христу Пречистому, Ему же служат ангельское вся воинство, ведлежа, видящие верные, и слышаешь нам освящение неживесень. Слава Господи, Христу Твоему честному, победоносный явится ради святых, реже животодамца Христа, свыше же Христов всех множество от коня, варварское шатание и победителей, и являя верные люди. Святи мученицы Боговей, молите Бога о нас. Мученическими пострадавшие болезнями мучительских, не устрашестися крещением Христу вопиющим, благословен Бог Отец наших, святи мученицы Боговей, молите Бога о нас. Терпение, нуждавшее болезни, вражие, лютая, победисте, коварство Христово пьющее, благословен Бог Отец наших. И ныне слава Отцу и Сыну и Святому Духу, и ныне песно и во веки веков. Аминь. Иже во утробу девы все явися, и тая ради Адама новой, благословен Бог Отец наших. Ищи отрацы Израилевы, яко же равнини добротой благочестия, чистые славно пищакуся глаголюче, благословите вся дела Господня Господа, Отцы превозносите во все веки. Помилуй меня, Боже, помилуй меня, страстей, смущений, рете, оскорбляя душу мою, Богородице, тишины же и мира, я же виновника чистая, и подателя ваших мирных устроений, соблюдающих, и тосные меня, исполни радости веселья. Помилуй меня, Боже, помилуй меня, спасение подавляется нам, явилось Иисус, Богородице, Божие, спаса и владыку. Всячески тем же мою спасение, сподоби смиренную, мою душу песню словите Тя верного вся веки. Слава Господи Христу Твоему честному, Твой крест преобразуя, и яко иногда на многих положь ладни примерно и благослови, благодати Твоя сердце, научая подписи благословите, священники пойте, люди превозносите во веки. Слава Господи Христу Твоему честному, о неизреченного Твоего Христа, снития и из глаголанных благих, воплотися и распятых, смерть грешивший человек и поклятвы, источив нетление на преблажение древе, и прославленный кресты вовеки. Святи мученицы, покоревайте Бога нас, истинные рачители закона, известные хранители бывших, прихвальные мученицы Твоей, Христа вовеки. Святи мученицы, покоревайте Бога нас, седьмой раз светлый плод, святого корени, яко истинно среди поколений, мученики Господни, почти достойно. Благословим Отца и Сына и Святого Духа Господа, законном ревните, единодушны, страдайте, верных, светлым, окрепеть прочую и почнем достойно, и на небесной вовеки. Последний нас рассветили воплощенного Духа, священницы Твойте, и превозносите Его вовеки. Слава благослови, поклоняемся Господи, поющих Его, носящего совеки. Благословите Его, Пресвятой, равнодейственный, Отец Небесного Бога, вознесет Слово, и опросу Божие, и превозносите всем жизнь подобающего, Духа Всесвятого вовеки.
Богородице, молитвенная песня возвеличим.
Великий душа моя Господа, и водопровод мой спаси мне, честнейшую Богиню, славнейшее сравнение Серафим, без искреннего богословущую, сущую Богородицу величание. Я как тебе на сыне разрыв сводия, силу не обложение всегоди, честнейшую святую, и славнейшее сравнение Серафим, без искреннего богословущую, сущую Богородицу величание. Я сотворение вечности святой имя Его, и милости Господа Твоя, Отца Его, честнейшую Серафим, и славнейшее сравнение Серафим, без искреннего богословущую, сущую Богородицу величание. Собрите правовышную своею, растащи воды мыслью сердца и честнейшую Евудим, и славнейшую без сравнения Серафим, без искреннего богословущую, сущую Богородицу величание. Не сложи себе сотрясной вознесись неверный, алчущий исполни боги богатящийся пустичи, честнейшую Евудим, и славнейшую без сравнения Серафим, без искреннего богословущую, сущую Богородицу величание. Господи, Израилю, Отца своего помилуйте милости, якоже доброго Отца нашего права и семени подошедшего века, честнейшую Евудим, и славнейшую без сравнения Серафим, без искреннего богословущую, сущую Богородицу величание. Образ чистого Христа Твоего, неповеримая купина показания тайная, и на не на нас напаси свидетельщую, госите молимся печь, Отца Богородица непрестанно величание. Помилуй меня, Боже, помилуй меня, Матерь Божия, все непорочная, милостивая Твою утробу мне, отверзи смысленного Бога, избави меня, ищущего убийцы, и растлите меня, помилуй, молюся, не возврати меня, пославлен на раба Твоего. Помилуй меня, Боже, помилуй меня, все моя жизни пути, предстательница неверное заступление, и избави меня все чистое, многих напасти печали, и врагов языка более дня вечного, избави меня. Слава Господи, Христу Твоему честному, древний Год, прислушание грехам, Божьей заповеди преступницы, явившейся, всего ради смерти и человеком, тем же бессмертие, просветление, победный крест Христов, Его же целуем. Слава Господи, Христу Твоему честному, все древные, чистые, крепкие, надежды, явися клятвы, избавление человеком радость предвижи, обличание мы начальника сил поклонимся, верни с весельем. Святи мученицы, молитвы, молите Бога нас, сокровища божественных дарований, воистину показастися богатство, неотъемлемое всегда мученицы, святи мученицы, молите Бога нас, молитвенницы, добрейшие мстителю, всех случаев и спросисте, не влажную жизнь душа наша, слава Отцу и Сыну и Святому Духу, и ныне и присно и во веки веков. Аминь. Радуйся, двери святая Богу отверстая, единому минутому и уже осити Дух Пресвятый. Тайниси Богородице рай, невозделанно возвративший Христа, им же крестные живоносные на земли насадись от его, тем небо спасибо, поклоняющийся ему всякие вечерде.
Охи, Владимир, Господи, помолимся.
Господи, помилуй.
Господи, спаси, помилуй, сохрани нас, Боже Твоей благодатью.
Господи, помилуй.
Пресвятую, пречестную, преблагословенную, славу Владычну нашу, Богородицу, Преснодеву Марию, со всеми святыми помянувши, сами себе и друг друга, и живот наш, Христу Богу предадим.
Тебе, Господи.
Я же хвалится силы небесных, и славу посылаем, Отцу и Сыну и Святому Духу, ныне и присно, и во веки веков.
Аминь. Чудный Господи, Маковей, Елизара, отроки и Соломонию, силу не сложишь шатание, начало сложного смея, и законослужители, бывшие венчавшися. Слава Отцу и Сыну и Святому Духу, и ныне и присно, и во веки веков. Аминь. Крест границы всея вселенной, крест красота церкви, крест царей держава, крест верных утверждений, крест ангела слава и демонов ясва.
Okay, good evening. I thought I would change it up a little bit. We've been trying to find what exactly the intro music could be while we're, working on this. And I noticed there was a service going on. And now you know that no matter what we say tonight, compared to the service, it should be a relative disappointment. This is Deacon Joseph Swaden. We're here. I'm waiting for Bishop Enoch to see, and he gets his services at the Abbey are usually ended around 8:00, but it may be a longer service. There is a feast tonight. It's kind of the procession of the precious wood of the cross, which occurs at the beginning of August on the traditional reckoning. But in any case, let me see. I'm hoping he pops in soon. I'm going to take the banner off first because that was different. Hold on, he just wrote me, so I guess he just got out of church now. But we're going to be dealing with, we're going to be talking about some of the news that's occurred this week. It's been pretty interesting, as well as we're going to review the discussion that we had with the other Paul. Benedicite.
Benedicite.
Okay. And Bishop Enoch is here. How are you feeling, Vladika?
I'm all right.
Okay. So as I was just saying, we're going to go over some of the news of the past week. We're going to go over the discussion we had on the other Paul's channel, which has generated some interest in what true orthodoxy is. And of course, we're here to answer questions. I'm going to put up a link live, so anyone who wants to come in and chat or ask questions live can do so. Give me just a moment here. If I sound a little bit kind of pumped up, it's because for some reason, Vladika, I decided rather than look for music, there was a vigil going on for the Wood of the Cross in the St. Sergius Russian church. So I just put that on the screen instead. So, compared to a service, we're going to try our best to do something interesting and keep things going. And let me get that StreamYard link. And we're going to add that to the chat. And I'm going to put it in blue in just a moment. Okay, don't need to hear that.
Tonight we celebrate the Feast of St. Peter in Chains, as well as the commemoration of the Holy Maccabees and St. Ethelwald, and we begin the Dormition Fast.
Now, a question. Now, St. Peter in Chains, that's a particularly Western celebration. If you could expound a little bit on it, since you were just in service.
The Empress Eudoxia in, I think, the 400s. Let me check real quick. Empress, I think she was the 400. Eudoxia. Yeah, the wife of Theodosius. Theodosius the second. She was the wife of Theodosius the second. In the Eastern Roman Empire. She made a pilgrimage to Jerusalem. And there, I believe the patriarch showed her the chains that St. Peter had, like St. Peter had when he was in prison, as described in the Book of Acts. Of course, the account, the history recorded in the Book of Acts is Herod, not Herod the Great, but one of the Herod's his successors, killed James, all right, the brother of John, St. James, brother of John, and he began to slay other Orthodox Christians. And he found that it pleased the Jews, according to the Book of Acts. And so then he put St. Peter in prison, and he planned after Pascha that he was going to, kill St. Peter. So, however, as St. Peter was sleeping, he was in prison, and there were like two guards beside him also sleeping. They had him in chains and stuff, so they couldn't get away. An angel came and loosed the chains, and he was taken out of the prison. St. Peter initially thought this was like a vision. Maybe he was just having a vision. This wasn't really happening. But he was taken and he was delivered to the church. And there's sort of a somewhat comical account where someone, I think someone came and saw St. Peter, and they, let's find it. Let me just read it from the Book of Acts. It's better.
Okay.
Acts, Peter. Yeah, Acts 12, a liberation of St. Peter.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, you get it? Okay. So, here it is. Okay, I'll put it up. You can put it on the screen if you want. It's right here.
Oh, okay. One moment.
Okay. So, it says, now about that time, Herod the king stretched forth his hand to vex certain of the church, and he killed James, the brother of John, with the sword. And because he saw it pleased the Jews, he proceeded further to take Peter also. Then were the days of unleavened bread. And when he had apprehended him, he put him in prison and delivered him to 4 quaternions of soldiers to keep him, intending after Easter, I think that may actually be Passover or Pascha in the original Greek, to bring him forth to the people. Peter therefore was kept in prison, but prayer was made without ceasing of the church unto God for him. And when Herod would have brought him forth the same night, Peter was sleeping between 2 soldiers, bound with 2 chains, and the keepers before the door kept the prison. And behold, the angel of the Lord came upon him, and a light shined in the prison. And he smote Peter on the side and raised him up, saying, Arise up quickly. And his chains fell off from his hands. And the angel said unto him, Gird thyself and bind on thy sandals. And so he did. And he saith unto him, Cast thy garments about thee and follow me. And he went out and followed him, and wist not that it was true which was done by the angel, but thought he saw a vision. When they were past the first and second ward, they came unto the iron gate that leadeth into the city, which opened to them of his own accord, and they went out and passed on through one street, and forthwith the angel departed from him. And when Peter was come to himself, he said, Now I know of a surety that the Lord hath sent his angel, and hath delivered me out of the hand of Herod, and from all the expectation of the people of the Jews. And when he had considered the thing, he came to the house of Mary, the mother of John, whose surname was Mark, where many were gathered together praying. And as Peter knocked at the door of the gate, a damsel came to hearken, named Rhoda. And when she knew Peter's voice, she opened not the gate for gladness, but ran in, and told how Peter stood before the gate. And they said unto her, Thou art mad. But she constantly affirmed that it was even so. Then said they, It is his angel. But Peter continued knocking, and when they had opened the door and saw him, they were astonished. But he beckoned unto them with the hands to hold their peace, and declared unto them how the Lord had brought him out of the prison. And he said, Go show these things unto James and to the brethren. And he departed and went into another place. So it commemorates. So anyway, so the Empress Eudoxia, she goes to Jerusalem, makes a pilgrimage. The patriarch shows her the chains that the church kept as relics that had been bound to St. Peter. And she takes them and she goes to Rome, and I think she gives them as a gift to St. Leo the Great.
Okay.
And St. Leo the Great said, well, you know what? We have chains that as relics that when St. Peter was in prison under Nero. All right. So, and what happened is the chains, they put them together in a miracle cord where they intertwined. So it was.
Oh, wow.
And anyway, and then during the time of the Emperor Otto I in the 960s, one of Otto's servants was possessed, I think, by the devil or a demon. And they brought out the chains of St. Peter, the relics, and they put them on the possessed man, and the demon immediately fled from him. So it commemorates the biblical event as well. And so also, I think, so during the time, I believe, St. Leo built a church called the Church of St. Peter in Chains. He built a basilica to hold the relics. See, a lot of feasts, whether they're Byzantine or Old Roman, or Western Roman or Eastern Roman, actually were sort of peculiar in many ways to the cities, to the great cities of the patriarchates. And as that rite of that particular rite of the patriarchate spread itself, or whether it influenced other liturgical practices,
these
church
feasts,
yeah,
kind of.
Exactly. It's like, for example, all the Byzantine practices for processions for the Holy Cross and things like that. I think that was originally instituted in Constantinople because there were a lot of plagues that started to happen in August for some reason, like in the summer. You could have a plague season, and so there were sort of petitions for that to end. What have you? I mean, you might not necessarily have similar plagues in far northern Russia where it might be colder. Maybe you do. But you would still keep that tradition. I mean, there are other emphases that can be put onto it. So the same for St. Peter and James. Now, there may have been, actually, I think the Feast of St. Peter and James spread to Gaul also pretty early. So that's what it's mainly for. Also, we also commemorate the Holy Maccabees, obviously the Maccabee martyrs today, and St. Ethelwald, who was the Bishop of Winchester, who was one of the 3 great monastic reformers of 10th century England. And one of the great English saints. We commemorate him. And also today is called Lammas Day, or Lammas Day, which means loaf mass day. Loaf mass day. Lammas. Lammas is an Anglo-Saxon word for bread, or it means loaf mass or bread mass.
Okay, loaf mask. I thought
yeah.
you said wolf mask, and I was like, wow, I really picked a good pick for this.
Oh, okay. So it's called Lammas Mass, or Loaf Mass, because today, among our people in the ancient times, and I guess for those who still observe the agricultural way of life, um, this was a day the church were appointed for bringing sort of the first beginning of the first fruits
The
of the
first
harvest,
fruits of the harvest,
especially the bread. So tomorrow, for example, when we have mass, we'll have bread that will be that will be blessed, um, in addition to other blessings. Obviously, not Eucharistic bread. It's not going to be, but we'll have Eucharistic. We'll have obviously
It's
leavened
a
bread,
special,
but it's
blessing
special
for
bread. Yes,
Yeah,
that's made. Okay, so loaf mass was a big thing, and people would bring various loaves. But when they say loaf, by the way, they didn't mean necessarily an oblong loaf. That's how we think of a loaf of bread today.
right. They
If
meant
you,
the round thing.
yeah,
So,
exactly.
that's becoming more popular.
Yeah, if you ever see like ancient pictures of like Roman bread or medieval bread, it's like a large,
A sourdough.
it's like a rounded. It's like a phosphor before it's cut in the
It's
east.
like it's a
That's exactly
sourdough.
what it is. Yeah.
It's a big sourdough. It's
So yeah.
kind of
Well,
that's common.
yeah, exactly. So anyway, so that's what we're celebrating, and we also keep the beginning of the Dormition fast. Dormition fast begins, and that's
This one's only 2 weeks, everyone. So
yes.
don't worry. I know that a lot of people dread the Dormition fast because it falls right after the St. Peter and Paul fast. The difference is the St. Peter and Paul fast can vary. It can go up to 40 days. I think it can even go up to 41 or 42. The Dormition fast is always 2 weeks long. So
to me, it seems like Saints Peter and Paul has. It seems for some reason it seems like it's a long time ago. I don't know why, but it's not that long ago.
It's been a really, really busy kind of couple of months for us. So it's been a lot. So yeah, as I was mentioning, what we're going to be talking about today, we're going to be talking about some of the news that happened this week. We're going to be looking at NFTU, and we're going to go over the discussion with the other Paul. And so again, this is a live call-in show, so anyone who's here is welcome to just click the blue link and jump on for questions or comments. But if not, then we're going to get started. So let me just start with that, and I'm going to open up to the wonderful page NFTU, which is kind of the central kind of hub of all the stuff we do. It's basically like we're updating it so it has more video abilities, and that's kind of what we're building out. It's always been more True Orthodox news. We're building out for True Orthodox news, apologetics, and finally as a resource. And so it's just been kind of crazy times. I can see that it's showing the big news this week, of course, which is there's Archbishop Elpidopoulos on Monday. For those that aren't familiar, I'm just going to read it short. I was actually going to make a short with it. I might still do that, but I'm not sure. But on Monday, Archbishop Elpidopoulos reiterated his commitment to elevating deposed Royal Korean priest Alexander Belya to the episcopate. You can see here he is smiling right there, big smiley guy, effectively ignoring the request of the Assembly of Canonical Orthodox Hierarchs in the ROCOR. Just so you know, it does not have this background, but apparently, I guess the assembly attempted to stop him and say, like, well, you can't do this. And the top signer was Metropolitan Joseph, who, I think it was 2 weeks later, ended up having to resign. Belya is entrusted by the Ecumenical Patriarchate to lead a Slavic archdiocese. That's a real thing. There's a Slavic vicariate. You can find the website. I'm not sharing it. It just looks ridiculous to me. With the goal of taking in Slavic clergy who don't want to be under the rope of the Moscow Patriarchate and placing them directly under Patriarch Bartholomew. Ultimately, they tried to stop it. There's a lawsuit going on between Belya and the ROCOR. It named Metropolitan Hilarion, who obviously has since passed. But he's going to be made a bishop of the Ecumenical Patriarchate anyway. Hopefully he doesn't recite the Filioque when he gets chosen. And so, and then of course the text here includes the letter, which, I mean, quite frankly, I had less than polite way I was going to express it when I was talking about the how Elpidopoulos seems to be reacting, but it was with callous disregard And so let me see here. Aaron says when everything's on fire, time passes faster. I'll jump in when you all get to the review of the other Paul discussion. Okay, well, I mean, yeah, that's fine. And so the other, so that's basically kind of the biggest news of the week. Is church-wise, I mean, there's been bigger news like the Maui fires and things like that. And God willing, everyone survives, but it's not looking very good. But yeah, so that's kind of where we are right now with the latest news. There was another article which we're going to jump into. This is a members only article. So I will simply be putting up the kind of the title and putting it up on the screen, but it won't be accessible. But we'll give you a gist of what it's about for those who are not members, because we do want to encourage everyone to sign up. This is literally my job right now, and frankly, it's a little difficult to say the least, because it's something new. To be honest, I wasn't quite expecting things to go the way they have. In some ways, I've been amazingly blessed. As you all know, many of you know, I was ordained last Friday to the priesthood, and so that's great. It's given me a lot more opportunities to assist and to help people. But it also gives opportunities to. I'm looking to see how we can take NFTU and build it to where it can become a resource for people trying to find true orthodoxy. The simple reality is things are not, well, it's on the screen. The point is, it's as the title of this is World Orthodoxy is Collapsing. Again, this is a members only article, which means that if you aren't a member, it's not available. That said, we're going to talk about it a little bit because the title is.
Did you want to talk about the previous members only article we haven't talked about?
Oh, we can afterwards. I think this one is actually piquing a lot of interest. And okay. I think people may think it's like a clickbait title, and it's not. It is absolutely not a clickbait title. As a matter of fact, we can't even talk about the article because even the advantage of the article as a members-only article is the advantage of that is, frankly, all the links and all the proofs and all the information and all the research is literally in the article. Effectively, the basic idea behind this is exactly what it sounds like. Most people tend to think of World Orthodoxy, most people in World Orthodoxy tend to think of World Orthodoxy as a monolith. The truth is that's impossible to say right now. Atomic Lead asks, is it appropriate to say Axios for priests or is that only for bishops? No, it's appropriate for both, but there's a liturgical purpose to the Axios, which, it's fine. So it's no worries. That's perfectly normal. It's common. In any case, especially on the American continent, there's been a concerted effort to try to make it appear like World Orthodoxy is an organizational monolith. Somebody asked on our Discord when I explained the difference, when we were talking about the difference between formal and informal communion, how we have formal communion, but then occasionally, informally, some parishes will allow members of other jurisdictions to commune, and somebody was asking, was that an abnormality? Is that an innovation? I explained that not only was it not an innovation, but more likely than not, to put it clearly, when you think about World Orthodoxy in America, keep in mind that the two of the largest groupings, the Greek Orthodox Archdiocese and the Russian Church abroad under the Moscow Patriarchate, are not in formal communion. Every intercommunion, every visit and communion, every sharing of sacraments, every single thing in this country since 2018, from a canonical standpoint, if we want to get super strict about it, has been illegal. That should not have been happening. They're supposed to be completely separate, but informal communion is what keeps things going. So when we say informal communion, people are like, well, how could you do that? Well, World Orthodoxy is doing that for a pretty long time. And mostly here, because here is, I hate to say this, but it's kind of the birthplace of the internet. And so, frankly, messages get out a lot faster here. If something's wrong in America, it's going to show everywhere. The point of this article is to show that everywhere is already on fire. You can go to Africa. You can go to Asia. You can go to Western Europe. We all know about Eastern Europe. Priest in the picture. But the point is that this sort of issue with communion and this broken communion, there is no real unity. It is a unity that largely exists on paper, and mostly in North America. And that, with the whole Belia elevation, that's going to be tested even further. So it's going to look less and less, it's more and more tenuous as things go on. Just to take a quick break, I see we have another question. Do you predict that a union with Rome will come? And if so, do you think a large chunk of what you call world orthodoxy will move towards unification with true orthodoxy? Honestly, I love this question, Vladika, because there's a lot of people. I don't know if you know this, but like I noticed that Father Peter Hears and Craig Trulia were asking about this and talking about this, and a lot of Roman Catholics are super hopeful. They're all talking about Nicaea 2025. This is a big shindig they're having in Nicaea for the 1700th anniversary of the Council of Nicaea. A lot of people, especially fighting from within people in World Orthodoxy, are like, are they going to do a big giant communion thing? And they're a part of them are like thinking the worst is going to happen, or maybe for them it's the best because it's finally going to be that big opportunity to leave. The reality is that big opportunity to leave came and went. They already allow for limited intercommunion between, say, the Greek Archdiocese and Roman Catholics, the Moscow Patriarchate and Roman Catholics. The Pope is already commemorated first in the Taxis in Constantinople. Ecumenical meetings have been going on with Rome and Constantinople. Craig correctly notes that they're all adopting the language of Chieti and Alexandria, which effectively allow kind of Rome freedom in their own sphere, whereas the patriarch, the ecumenical patriarch, will get freedom in his own sphere. The whole point is what they're doing is they're creating the foundations for union without having to do a formal union. So the real question that has to come is, do they have to bother? I mean, would they risk, if everyone that is against it is saying we'll go into schism, and the Patriarch in Rome are sitting there going, well, you haven't gone into schism yet, so why start now? Canonically, they should have gone into schism decades ago.
It's not a schism, though.
Schism? Are we going to go with the...
No. It's not. If you're... I mean, technically, you're not going into schism if you're breaking with heretics.
Yeah, no, I understand that, but the point is that...
they're going to call it schism. Okay.
Right, and that's what they're waiting for. They're waiting for the chance to finally be called schismatic for doing the right thing. And they had the chance. They had lots of chances. The point is that once they were already celebrating with heretics, and once the bishops were celebrating with heretics, once you added Rome to the diptychs, I mean...
Well, to be fair, I think they're not on a Sunday basis when Bartholomew does the great entrance. I don't believe he's mentioning the Pope. I think it's when they have ecumenical doxologies they are commemorating him. But I don't think they're still. I don't think in the Fanor they're actually commemorating the Pope
like every week
at the great entrance. No, I think that maybe a dozen times a year, but not every year.
Yeah, the schism thing came up. It's in the dictionary. I realized that in my debate with Resident Sleeper, a lot of people were like, "It's not schism, it's schism." I've heard it both ways.
Okay. All right. Well, that's not.
I'll try to say schism to make
it more important
happy.
about. Okay. All right. Yeah. All right. So that's it's a situation, and
so yeah, realistically, no.
We have more stuff coming, and it's only $5 a month.
That's true. It is only $5 a month to sign up on the website to read the article. We'll talk about the other paid article we put out last week.
Just so I understand, if $5 a month, you can read unlimited members-only articles, right?
Yeah, it's $5 a month.
Because we're having a new article I hope to publish on Monday that will be. I'm translating Hincmar Vraim's De Jure Metropolitanorum, where he defends the rights of metropolitans as the false decretos began to seep into parts of the West in the 9th century.
Now you
And-
might want to explain the relevance to Orthodox now on this. Because
well, obviously, the false decretals were sets of fabricated, interpolated decrees attributed to various sainted popes from the 2nd, 3rd, and 4th centuries, and sometimes 5th centuries, maybe a little bit later. And they, their goal, we're not sure who created them. There's a debate about whether they were created by some people in Rome, or maybe there were some people in the Rhine monasteries that created them with the purpose of breaking the power of the synodal provinces. See, the West, even in the 9th century, had a largely, even much later, had a largely system of where each ecclesiastical province operated with a metropolitan. So you'd have 10 to 12 bishops. The president of that would be a metropolitan bishop. And then various groups of provinces would be grouped under like an archbishop. All right. And theoretically, they had some sort of connection to their patriarch in Rome, although it was generally, a very moderate connection at absolute most. However, there were certain figures who wanted to expand the powers of the Church of Old Rome, and so they fabricated and forged decrees, saying things like no bishop could be deposed unless the Pope approved it. No council could be called unless the Pope approved it or gave permission for it. And when this was brought into France, into Germany, these decrees in the mid-800s, the Archbishop of Reims at the time, Hincmar, and others were shocked. They had never heard about this. Their canon law books were, for example, the old, Western canons. There was one in particular, the Antiquus Canonibus. I can't quite remember. The ancient ecclesiastical canons, or ancient ecclesiastical laws called, which was a large collection, sort of their version of the Nomocanon, that had, canons from Nicaea, Chalcedon, Ephesus, Constantinople, Carthage, various other councils, which clearly defined a system where the highest form of appeal wasn't really much more than the metropolitan or the archbishop metropolitan. And even the concept of the question about the Sardican canons, about the Sardican canons granting the Bishop of Rome the right to hear appeals, it was interpreted, I believe, that this meant he could allow a secondary trial, not that he could simply annul any decision reached by a provincial synod. So you could get a second trial, but he couldn't just get, exonerated. So Hincmar wrote a tract that's called, I think it's generally called De Jure Metropolitanorum, concerning the right, or rights, I guess you might say, concerning the right of the metropolitans. And there are other, so it's a little bit of pages, so I'm going to probably publish it in sections. Once I get to 4 to 5 pages of translated material, I'll publish that, and then the next. And then there's a letter he wrote to Nicholas and such. So, and of course, it's interesting. I have my own thesis about matters because up until the whole filioque issue happened around 861, okay, there was this growing divergence between Rome and the archbishops in France and Germany, and even northern Italy. Especially Nicholas was not necessarily a likable person. He was very imperious. At one point, without a trial, he deposed the 2 archbishops of the Belgic peoples, and they essentially held their own council and anathematized. I think there is actually even some discussion about whether the archbishops of Canterbury and York were even in communion with him. I think Nicholas had done something. There was a number of problems going on, and at one point, I believe either Nicholas or his successor, there was a letter from Saint Photius to one of the Western emperors, and they were hoping that the emperor would, I guess, he would march to Rome and depose Nicholas, but Nicholas died anyway. But it's always interesting that it wasn't until Nicholas sort of riled up people in the West about the filioque issue, which he never quite explained exactly the whole details of it, that they didn't really restore sort of circle around the wagons a little bit. I mean, that didn't last. Everybody didn't like Nicholas anyway. But long story short, I'm translating Hincmar's articles. There aren't many. Hincmar's writings for a figure as important as he is in 9th century French and German history. You'd expect there to be a compendium of his translated works, and there aren't. So I think this will be useful because it demonstrates, among other things, that there was resistance to this false creedal concept, and even those who accepted it because people thought, well, maybe there are some long lost decretals. But Hincmar and other bishops, their reply was simply this: even if there were popes that said things like that, like we discussed, if what they say goes against the other known decretals of popes, which are sanctioned by the councils and by tradition and the canons, and it goes again, then you have to go with those already sanctioned councils, canons, and decrees that agree with them. All right, and you see this, in fact, at the Council of Pantheon, I believe in 876 or so, where Pope John VIII, or 880 maybe, Pope John VIII actually attempted to make and create either create an archbishopric in Sens for a bishop named Segis, or what have you, but he tried to make him primate of both all the Germanies, they called it, and all the Gauls. All right. And the bishops of Pantheon were horrified because Reims was the traditional archbishopric that had this sort of primacy, not only over Gaul, but over Germany. I mean, Reims was almost like a patriarch. It was just short of being a patriarchate. In fact, it behaved in many ways like that. So they resisted this. The Pope John VIII had this decree. The emperor was at the council in Heath for several sessions, harangued the bishops that needed to do this. The papal legate Marinus did it. I think it was Marinus did as well. And the only reply they could get was the bishops said that they would be more than happy to obey the decree of Pope John VIII, saving the rights of the bishops and the metropolitans in accordance with the canons. In other words, if what the Pope said was in accordance with the councils and the canons, then it's like a tautology. If the Pope, what he says is right, we'll obey it. If a judgment given according to equity or fairness, then we will accept it. But their argument was that this judgment is not given according to that.
Now,
So,
one thing, just to cut you off here for a moment, I should note, has this ever been translated before in English?
No, you can read text about it, but for some reason, I mean, you can read. There's a book called The Life and Work of Hincmar. There are several books about. This is sort of the interesting thing. There are books about these figures, in that you have chapters that explain their works. But maybe you'll see one or two sentences translated, but that's it. It's
yeah, and this is just because the reason I bring this up is because anyone who goes to NFTU and looks up older articles which have references to older Latin texts, Bishop Enoch has been translating Latin texts from the originals that are not generally available to the English-speaking public on our website for a few years now. So this particular text, which is an important text to pre-schism Western history, is not yet translated in English, and he's fixing that literally as we speak. So that's part of the reason why it's a paid article. The other ones that he's done before in the past are still free, but we're trying to do important stuff here. I know that it seems like we're just reporting news and saying, okay, $5, please. But no, it's not that at all. What we're doing, there's a lot of different things, but this Bishop Enoch's focus on pre-schism Western text is really important.
I also think it contradicts the Chieti ideology that the Pope was always supreme in the West.
Yeah.
I think people that I remember when that document, and there's stuff in Alexandria that got agreed on or what have you, and they said they've agreed with us. The ecumenical patriarchs equal to him in the. No, I was like, this is a bad situation. It's essentially you're saying, oh, the Pope is supreme in the West, and now the Fanor is going to be supreme in the East.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
just more lies about history. Now we've just
yes.
doubled up the lies. So these things are actually historically important for the historical record. Ultimately,
I should also point out that the treatise by Hincmar was referenced after the Great Schism and after the defeat of the Paleo Western and the Imperial Party in the West, which was it took 50 years to defeat us. I mean, I consider them to be the Orthodox of the West that lasted. So once we were defeated, there was the betrayal that happened. Henry IV, he didn't quite, he wasn't near the end, kind of whatever. But Henry V, his son, sort of went along with the Concordant of Worms. Some similar things happened in England. I mean, that's a whole other history about what people thought was happening or have. Oftentimes, what would happen is the Pope would make it like to end the aftermath of the Hildebrandian takeover because there was still a lot of resistance. What would happen is the Pope's legates would meet with the king and maybe a few bishops, okay, and they'd sort of have quote unquote a council, and they'd say, well, now we've agreed on this or that or have, even though no one else really did. Like there was the one city, I cannot remember, Liège, that was so resistant to accepting the doctrines of Hildebrand that his successor, Pascal II, allied with various, I think, French counts, and they laid siege to the city. And the Archbishop of Liège and his clergy wrote this well-known. There's a debate about whether Sigibert of Gamblu was the ghostwriter for the Synod of Clergy, or whether the Archbishop, or he just reported it in his chronicle, one of his texts.
Right.
But if it's generally acknowledged that Sigibert of Gamblu was a monastic who died in like 1120, he never accepted Hildebrandianism. A lot of people did not. The situation just became untenable for them to continue on in the future decades, because if all the bishoprics are taken over, where do you get clergy from? There's all these problems that creep up and such. Okay.
Yeah.
So the Liège clergy reply, and they say that Pascal's clearly he's like an antichrist figure. He's clearly against the canons. I don't even know if they accepted him as a legitimate. I don't think they accepted him even as a legitimate pope. They didn't accept the idea that he had immediate jurisdiction. They certainly didn't accept the idea that he had temporal supremacy and that he could command armies to lay siege to cities. So they would, this was part of the. This is sort of the dark side, you might say, of the Crusader mentality everybody talks about. Everybody likes the idea of going fight Muslims and such, and that's not terrible. Although the Crusades ultimately were sort of a failure. I mean, they would have been better if they had sent all these forces into Spain and finished the Reconquista earlier, and then just sent them into Asia Minor and helped the Byzantines instead of. And then, because by the Fourth Crusade, it turns into attacking Constantinople. Within 100 years, they go from straight up battle with the Muslims to sacking the great city. So the dark side was the Pope now gradually had, or the so-called Pope, it wasn't the real Pope, he had a military force that he could command. And that did not help, and it became a problem. So the point is the assumption of things like papal. They often talk about papal primacy, which is a vague term. I hate when someone says, "Oh, the fathers believed in papal primacy." Well, primacy. What do you mean by primacy? Do you mean he's first among equals? Do you mean he has these Sardican privileges? I mean, what are they by primacy? Roman Catholics often mean immediate jurisdiction in Vatican I, Pastor Eternus, or something like that,
Right?
Which is it's absurd. So these works of Hincmar were very important. There was a false start under Nicholas. It was rebuffed vigorously, and it more or less collapsed. And by the time you get to the 80s, the papacy had sunk into oblivion. John VIII was murdered by one of his political opponents, for example, in the middle of a procession.
And then we enter into the period of the pornography.
Pornocracy. That got worse. You had Pope Formosus, which some people consider a heretic, some people consider him a saint. There's conflicting reports about him. He was dug up, and they had the cadaver synod for him, where they put his body on trial, and they deposed him, and then they declared all of his ordinations invalid, which created a problem after 20 years, and because they discovered that Formosus had ordained several hundred bishops or something like that. And the Pope who deposed him posthumously had been ordained by somebody who had been ordained by him. So that created a bit of an issue if you call him invalid.
Yeah.
And the pornocracy and the papacy, and if it had not been for the German Empire, basically the closest you could get to any kind of Western Empire, the pornocracy in Rome would have been even worse. I mean, it was worse under John XII, who basically was just committing adultery with people. He was invoking, even up to the point where he began to invoke Jove. You know who Jove is? It's just nothing from Jupiter. He began to involve himself in like occult games of dice and called upon the pagan gods. He just And so what happened is that they met in Rome in 963, and they deposed him. John was like, "I'm not accepting this." And the emperor and the bishop said, "We're deposing you." And then he he tried to kill the emperor then with some of his militia, and that failed, and that didn't make the emperor happy. And eventually, he got the deposed Pope John the 12th got caught in bed with a woman who was married to another man.
Yeah, I feel
He
like
was, yeah.
yeah,
Anyway,
maybe
so my point was that we have another article coming out also that goes through several primary sources from the pre-system period that it talks about these things I'm talking about. You know the one I'm talking about. We're working on that.
We got two comments. Well,
Yes.
one comment and one question, and
Okay.
I'm loath to answer it. One 19th century French bishop, Gallican, said the true purpose of all the Crusades was rooting out the errors of St. Photius or something like that, and of course meant that as a positive. That wouldn't surprise me.
Yeah, I mean that Urban II. Remember, we forget that when Urban II there was one of the councils he held in the 1088. It was Urban the Hildebrandian Pope in 1089. I'm not. I don't want to be
Urban II. Yeah.
Okay, Otho of Lagny was. I think his name was Otho de Lagny was his actual secular name. What have you? What's that noise, Father?
Oh, sorry. No, I was
Okay, go ahead.
a piece of plastic.
Okay,
And then,
so anyway, so what happened was that at this council, the Byzantine government, even the patriarch, instructed the one of the Orthodox still Byzantine bishops in the south of Italy, maybe the Archbishop of Otranto, Basil of Otranto, I can't quite remember the diocese, or maybe Basil Reggio. And they told him to go meet Otho de Lagny or Urban II.
Your volume just went up to a normal level and it keeps dropping down.
Okay, I'm sorry. Can you hear me better now?
A little bit.
Oh, I'm sorry. I don't know. My computer is supposed to be new, but it's
there. Now it's better.
Okay, I'm sorry. It's just the connections in the back. So Basil Reggio goes and meets Urban. And first off, Basil didn't want to meet Urban because Basil said we already have discussions going on with Clement or Wibert of Ravenna. And he says this is going to work out much better with this Pope Clement / Wibert of Ravenna. Because why? He didn't, even whatever you might say, if you as long as you don't default except Dictatus Papae principles, you can find some sort of agreement that can be an orthodox agreement, even at that time. Because remember, contrary to popular opinion or popular position, the Filioque was not spread everywhere in all the creeds. You still had a Subiaco monastery that had missals or sacramentaries that were published with the original nice Constantinopolitan symbol of faith. I found there was the Mainz missal that the 11th century similar. There's an Anglo-Saxon Psalter from the same time that has the symbol of faith in it without the Filioque. So it wasn't like that was that was a done deal. That's somewhat of an exaggeration. So Basil was basically told to drop Wibert of Ravenna, which is a disaster. He was, I think, probably a good argument that he was the last Orthodox pope. Well, I mean, there were two successors that were killed, so they may have been, but he was the last big chance. Okay, so he goes to this council and he comes away saying that Urban is this godless Frankish heretic. Now, no, Wibert was French and German, but he never called him a heretic. Okay, so the point is why did the Byzantines want Urban II? I think they thought they could make an agreement and Urban could deliver 100,000 or maybe tens of thousands of soldiers, the Crusaders. I think Urban, and I think Atomic Lead has a point. This is where I'm bringing Atomic Lead. I think the papacy at the time, the so-called papacy, or the Urban, they had ulterior motives. Why? If you get an army of 100,000 people over to Asia Minor and they're loyal to the Hildebrandians, and the Byzantines have allowed this massive military force over there, what's going to happen? Well, they took Antioch, and they didn't turn. I don't think they turned it over to the Byzantines, and they eventually took Constantine, the Levant, and they had conflict in many ways with the Byzantines, and it eventually leads to what? It leads to the sack of Constantinople.
All right, now the next one, I thought it was not one worth good to answer, but actually it might be useful just as a general thing. Aaron asks, how do you have an occult game of dice? Now, this sounds on the surface like a bad question to answer. However, I would point out that virtually all packs of cards that exist are based loosely on the tarot. So whenever you're playing with a pack of cards, you're playing with something that is based on an occult usage. I do not know exactly what the occult game of dice was, but I imagine it was probably tied to numerology because
Well, the Council of Rome said that John the 12th was invoking Jove and Jupiter and others in the games he was playing.
I presume that would be because certain numbers.
I mean, they didn't use the word occult, by the way. I'm using the word occult because I think it was something like.
Well, yeah. Well, if you're
So
invoking
right, okay.
pagan gods, yeah, it's kind of
Yes.
occult. Yeah.
Yeah.
The point is that it's as simple as attaching numbers to different deities, etc. The point is, as I mentioned, every pack of cards in someone's house is based on the tarot. So you have ways of. You can take something that's totally innocent. Not that I'm saying that a pack of cards is innocent, but dice can be considered innocent and make it into something horrible. It just depends.
And don't forget that by the time you get to the Renaissance, I mean there was like super occultism going on in the Vatican in the 1400s, and like they were actually using tarot card stuff.
Yeah, that's the first decks of tarot cards which existed.
They claimed it was white magic. And
yeah,
they were divining the will of the angels or something.
The earliest tarot card, the complete tarot card sets that we have were from collections of cardinals in the 15th and 16th century.
And Michael Hoffman, who wrote a book called The Occult Renaissance Church Room, it's about 1,000 pages. He documents this with primary source scholars, materials, and I recommended, by the way, to the other poll to try to get him on because Reason and Theology had Michael Hoffman on about the usury book, and they took that down real quick. And I think it's because what can you say, especially when he brings up the primary sources of the popes. But then again, they took down you and Craig's roundtable with about Fatima, where you showed Fatima for what it was.
I'm not even sure what to make of this. I have a Twin Towers themed pack of cards from the World Trade Center souvenir shop before 9/11.
Is that the one that shows the Twin Towers?
I don't know. I assume it shows both towers, which, yeah, that's different. Okay, and then Tom, what card? I don't generally recommend going to the history of tarot cards, but most published sources of the history of tarot cards will list which cardinals had those cards. They're literally museum pieces right now. And then we did that one. Atomic Lead said Father Stephen Allen of the GOCK has mentioned how obviously demonic casinos are, if I recall correctly. I mean, yes, in the sense that they're pseudo gardens of earthly delight. I often, and this is mostly facetiously, compare casinos to Chuck E. Cheese for adults. But the idea is the same. You're getting take the Chuck E. Cheese example. You're basically indulging your children's most hedonistic urges to run around, to scream, to behave horribly, to play games. It's all about you, nonstop, and gorge out and enjoy life like it's a buffet. Then you go to a casino, and it's basically the same thing, except it has alcohol, which.
What I would I'll try to provide the material about we're going to provide the material about the deposition of John the 12th. From Luprand, and they give the charge about the invocation of the pagan deities by John the 12th, which, among other reasons, was a reason for the Council of Rome in 963 to depose him. And by the way, if you look in the wiki article about that council, someone got the information through and they're about to delete it. But anyway.
And then Sava says, I still have a set of Iraq's most wanted as they were giving out to U.S. troops in Iraq. This is something that bothers me. I understand that the troops get bored, but I've started to notice a kind of a pattern in the fact that, for example, a generation of soldiers or multiple generations of soldiers basically became smokers because the army gave them cigarettes in their rations. And then further, we find this with, we find now they were giving out card sets. Sava continues, I thought the Holy Father say all forms of gambling, games, dice, games of chance are demonic and should be avoided by all Orthodox Christians. I'm not sure if there's a universal on games of chance, but I imagine that gambling is not looked on well I don't know. Have you ever seen anything that they specified card games and well, obviously dice we just saw, but
I don't know. What games of chance would games of chance? That's just gambling, right?
yeah, but yeah, and I mean, the point is,
Remember, the Holy Fathers also have a negative attitude toward hunting.
yeah,
I'm not, and in a sense, not hunting for food, for the necessity of food, but hunting as sort of a pastime.
right.
They thought it was cruel, unnecessary. You were, I mean, if you were killing an animal because you have to survive, that's one thing. To go around just hunting for sport, this generally was looked upon as in a negative way.
Another thing that surprised me,
and remember also on the Holy Mountain, I remember this from the Pedalion, St. Nicodemus's commentary. There were various rulings by monasteries that monks could not play, for example, chess. Because what's the point in playing chess? You need to go read your Bible or go to church or pray. You're not there to go play chess. Though that's of course not a game of chance. But
okay,
we might ask what were the purposes of such games of chance, and it's going to lead to sorts of very vice. I mean, remember dice? Remember the games of dice that people played in the alleys? So maybe they still do that.
correct. And so our Lord told Saint Hubertus about much hunting for sport. That's correct. And I mean, you'd be surprised at how much stuff the Holy Fathers do cover.
Like dancing. Dancing is dancing. And for example, if I were to do a wedding for Orthodox, for two, a man and a woman, obviously that's only cover a wedding.
Yeah.
Like where you were to celebrate a marriage,
a wedding. Okay.
Yeah. If you were to do that, and you went to a reception, and then everybody started there was like a waltz. You would have to get up. Canonically, you need to get up and leave. I
wouldn't stay. I probably wouldn't go to the reception.
Exactly. but I can also tell you, even though it's not strictly listed in the canons, you do find like Saint Nicodemus and other Holy Fathers, they did try to discourage even lay people from dancing. And it wasn't just necessarily because you might think, well, maybe it was because the ancient Greek and Romans have like these wild praise dance, and that made part of it. But remember, Saint Nicodemus is still against it, and that's the 1700s. And so, I mean, I know dancing. There are certain types of dances that are still used in Greece. I know people, But anyway, my point is that there is a strong tradition in the saints. Where they did not view dancing in a positive fashion.
I remember you had put up a quote, and I think it was back when you were on Facebook. Even Saint John Chrysostom talking about pop music, and
Saint Caesarius of Orles.
Oh, okay.
Saint John Chrysostom, I'm sure probably mentioned it too. Saint Caesarius of Orles, in one of his homilies, says that there are so many people, he says, who know all these little ditties and essentially songs of the devil about all kinds of obscene things like bar songs and whatever they had. But how many of these people, how many of them can recite a psalm or a canticle?
Yeah.
And you would spend your much better time saying the Our Father, the Creed, and various psalms than you would these other things, these other lascivious things. Then Saint Basil the Great preaches that during his time he was encouraged by the pious Christian farmers who, when they were plowing the fields, they would chant the psalms. The psalms were the hymn book. People would chant them, and I guess Saint Caesarius was still saying there were people in Gaul still doing that. So he kind of contrasts them with the people who weren't learning the psalms, but they were learning these other useless.
Yeah, exactly. Now, I mean, Simon says there's recommendations by the Holy Fathers for avoiding music. Well, that's what we're talking about, because the music that they're referring to are ultimately that it's pop music. It's just that it was the pop music of its time.
Now, I do recall Saint John Maximovich had no objections to certain types of classical music.
No, neither did Father Seraphim Rose, but in that sense, it's
that's still lower than church music, obviously.
Right, but
they didn't regard it as sinful, as my understanding.
I think it was mostly because it's not operatic, but it's instrumental.
Okay,
so it doesn't inspire conceptual thoughts about this or that.
And maybe the way some classical music, it doesn't, even the way it's played, it's not necessarily sensualistic, I guess, with the sounds.
It's not exactly passion driving. I mean, there's other. I'm not gonna
All
sit
right,
here and say
not
that
to go
none
too
of these
long,
are
not to go too
Yeah.
long. But anyway, my point was that
Okay, well, we did
translating
lose.
Hink.
We had Father
Sorry.
Boniface there for a second, and I was
Okay,
going to
so
bring him on, but he left.
okay, so translating Hinkmar's writings, and I hope to publish it in several posts. And so let's go to the Philaret. Talk a little bit about the Philaret article, which is interesting in itself. We can't talk too much about it because obviously it's members,
Yeah.
but we can speak a little bit about it.
Yeah, I mean, and okay, so wait, I didn't hear what you just said, Father Ludika.
We were going to look about the other members only article.
Yes, okay. Give me just a moment. And that article, that's an interesting one. The one that we had. Let me see if I can find it here. Yeah. This is the other members only article, and as I said, we're going to be adding new members only articles this week. These are from the past 2 weeks. Again, this is a member only article. Why Patrick Filaret of Kiev understands Earth better than you. This is not a defense in any way, shape, or form of the canonicity of Filaret Denisenko. I want to make that absolutely clear. What this is, it is a treatise on power, and I plan to be writing probably a series of about 10 articles over the course of the next few months on the nature of power, both ecclesiastically and physically, and how that manifests in our lives, and more importantly, how that affects us in the current situation that we're in terms of talking about governmental power, in terms of talking about individual strength and self-reliance. These things all work together, and like him or not, Patrick Filaret Denisenko is a case study in power. And so,
In survival.
well, I mean, in a sense, they're almost the same thing.
Yeah.
Because you're truly powerless when your survival is out of your hands. And so, it's absolutely, it's a matter of taking opportunities. And
You
so
know who would be a great saintly and orthodox example of someone who knew how to use power?
I'm listening.
Would be Saint Cyril of Alexandria.
Oh wow!
And
yes,
and this is why
absolutely.
people oftentimes attack him. Secularists do and liberals do for being,
Saint
I guess.
Justinian too. Now that I think about it,
Say who?
Saint Justinian.
Yes, they both knew how to use power, and they did, and they realized that the Christian leaders there was they didn't necessarily accept the. I mean, yeah, you can Lord Acton, the liberal, said absolute power corrupts absolutely. You know, he said that about Vatican I, by the way. That was why he said it. That's actually he was opposed to it, but Saint Cyril was confronted with who? The Patriarch of Constantinople at the time, Nestorius, who he was becoming evident. He was a
heretic. Yeah,
they had even the imperial court on his side. Nestorius had friends everywhere. Saint Cyril had to wield everything at his every resource at his disposal,
whether ecclesiastical, legal, earthly, you name it.
Exactly. And some people accuse him of using extra legal means, but that doesn't really mean anything in the Byzantine Empire.
Historians mostly.
When they say extra legal. And what happened, because he was so dedicated to this cause and he knew how to maneuver, and he was serious, and the church as a whole was serious. The church hierarchs, they went from complaints against Nestorius in late 428 or early 429 to, in 2 years, an ecumenical council being held. All right. You can also say that Pope Saint Leo the Great knew how to wield power and for a positive goal. All right. Because the same thing happened. You had the Patriarch of Alexandria, Dioscorus, went against orthodoxy. They had the Latrocinium, and it looked like everything was going to go against the church. But within 2 years, because of figures like Saint Leo the Great, they went from the absolute disaster of the Latrocinium, where I think Saint Flavian that was killed by the Monophysites, or was at the council or something, and they had Chalcedon, and again Saint Justinian. He knew how to use power. So it's not just the bad guys like Filaret of Kiev who knew how to use power.
He has been a bad guy in the past.
Yes. So anyway,
the question is he the worst right now?
No, I think, to me, my own opinion is he is probably a few steps less bad than Kirill of Moscow, actually. And I know people don't like to hear that, but
he's definitely a few steps less than Bartholomew of Constantinople.
Oh yeah, I mean he's at least. I think Kirill and Filaret are pretty much the same, sort of similar, except they're just different circumstances led to differences. Like if it had one more, well, it could have been a lot different. Just read the article, right? Could have been a lot different if a few.
You have to read it. It's available again. Remember, these subscriptions help us to continue our work, and they're basically my full-time job right now.
And remember, you can also get us if someone wants like if they want us to write an article about a particular topic, can they request that too, or how do they go about that?
Well, you can request it in like we have a members only call. We'll be doing our first one next week, where we'll take suggestions like that. Again, now granted, if you're looking for a specific topic for us to research, etc., contact us and we can give you some sort of idea of how much that would be. I mean, it wouldn't be much to get on that. Let me see here, and we've got I'd say Francis of Rome wins this contest. I mean, the papacy, and once you're the Pope, you kind of already get a bad guy status. But a part of me can't decide whether Francis is evil or stupid, or I mean, because some things he does. I mean, I imagine he's negatively disposed, but some things he does just strike me as idiotic. And I mean, granted, I could say the same about Joe Biden. That doesn't necessarily mean the person's not evil.
You can be evil and stupid.
I guess to me that doesn't strike me as somebody who gets that much power and authority. But maybe that's how it works. I mean, yeah. Why not both, Eric?
Well, remember in the case of Francis, he almost won, or basically won some. I can't quite remember how they did the elections, the papal elections, Benedict, when after John Paul II died. But Francis almost won the election, or there's some sort of this tacit agreement that if you almost win or you win in the first round but not in the second, the cardinals, if they survive, will elect you later or something. But then it could be a case of Francis just plain stupid.
Yeah, it could be.
Because remember, if you read stuff about Francis when he was in Argentina, right?
Yeah.
Okay, he was Argentina. What was the Archbishop of Buenos Aires or something?
Buenos Aires.
Yeah. People, there talked about how malicious he was, and he just took revenge on everybody, and he was just cruel. They found it amazing that he was being portrayed as this almost like a nice old man when this is just the guy uses foul language constantly. And he just it's almost like they're doing a repeat of that movie, Adrian Quinn movie from the 60s, which was absurd and stupid enough. It was horrible. But called The Ring of the Fisherman. But Francis is certainly But Francis is certainly no Adrian Quinn. So I shouldn't talk about movies. We shouldn't watch some of those movies. But
okay, wait, I see Father Boniface has rejoined the stream. Give me one moment. Hello, Father.
Hey, hello. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you. What's your question, comment, idea, thoughts?
Just, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
No, I don't have a question right now. I'm just trying to get my technology in order.
Okay, we'll continue. If you have anything, just...
Well, if you need any help with anything, I guess, just let us know, okay?
Okay, so, Father, let's cover the next issue.
All right. The next one, and I think a lot of people have been waiting on this, our discussion with the other Paul on Wednesday. We were guests on the other Paul's YouTube stream.
And explain to everyone who this gentleman is.
The other Paul is an Anglican apologist. He generally referred to himself as a Protestant apologist, but became somewhat uncomfortable with the idea of being generically a Protestant apologist, so he kind of refers to himself as an Anglican apologist now. He's done some work with some people like with Patrick Petrulia and some other people, and he basically argues with Roman Catholics and Orthodox, and he invited us on, and we talked a good bit, 3.5 hours or something like that, where we talked about the history of true Orthodoxy. And there was also kind of a discussion on the origins of what modernism, I believe you were going through on that.
Yeah, modernism, ecumenism, such.
And so I know that Aaron was saying he wanted to come on. Yeah, there he is. And he had some comments about that. Hello, Aaron. How's it going?
It's going good. How does my mic sound?
You sound fine.
Okay, good. I'm trying a different setup. Continue. I'll jump in with what I wanted to talk about in a minute once you get done with the preamble.
Well, did you have more to add to the preamble, Valico?
Nope.
Nope. So go ahead, Aaron. Your turn.
All right. So one of the things that y'all ended up getting on a few hours into it, y'all ended up touching on the atonement. And I realized when y'all were talking about that, I've never actually, despite the fact that I've been looking into Orthodoxy for 2 years now, heard the Orthodox take on the atonement, because the world Orthodox don't talk about it ever.
Yeah, there's a reason for that. That's because of the de-emphasis of the juridical in world Orthodoxy to sell it as some sort of fluffy Eastern religion. It's almost as if they wanted to make Christianity look like it was actually like Buddhism with a cross. But I think they generally overemphasize the mystical and the visual. Go ahead, Felipe.
I think they misemphasize or misapply the mystical. Might be better to say that.
Okay.
I'm just saying. Anyway, so I'm going to pull up something from Metropolitan Philaret of Moscow about the
Okay.
what you talking. Okay.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, I think that's basically one of the reasons why it's not discussed is because it sounds too, as they usually put it, quote unquote, Western. It is not a Western concept. It can be argued that it has some origins in the Latin patristic tradition, but to imply that it's not there in the Orthodox Eastern tradition after the schism is really inaccurate.
Well, I think in large part is, when people talk about the atonement now, it always has to be in the frame of the Calvinist idea of atonement. And I think that makes a lot of people uncomfortable nowadays.
Yeah,
The Calvinist idea is that Christ only died for the elect. That's one of the important things. In the Calvin's view, there's a small portion of the population that Christ actually only died for. And the rest, they were always predestined to go to hell because God hated them from all eternity. So, I can see why people would not like that. Because it's a heresy. So
yeah, but it's not. It was never our position. In other words, that's kind of applying a framework, after the fact, to what the Orthodox teaching is. But the basics of free will, etc., still exist. God didn't, make some people to damn them as they have in, say, Islam. But the opportunity for all mankind is there with the crucifixion.
Yes, I would like to. I don't have a way to. I can give you the link.
Give me the link and I'll share it.
So here, it's just from my gab, because it's a quote from St. Nicholas Cavasalis.
Okay.
And I'll read it out. St. Nicholas Cavasalis he was Archbishop of Thessalonica. He reposed in 392. And he said, this is from his book 4, from his book The Life in Christ, which is translated in English. It's called the Excursus Christ's Atoning Work. So this is what the great St. Nicholas Cavasalis teaches. He says, when a man has fallen, it is not possible for him to be raised by human power, nor can human evil be destroyed by human righteousness. The commission of sin involves injury to God himself, for it says, you dishonor God by breaking the law, Romans 2:23. There is need of virtue greater than is found in man to be able to cancel the indictment. For the lowest, it is particularly easy to commit an injury against him who is greatest. Yet it is impossible for him to compensate for this insolence by any honor, particularly when he is in many ways indebted to him whom he has injured. And he who is injured is so far superior that the distance between them cannot even be measured. He then who seeks to cancel the indictment against himself must restore the honor to him who has been insulted, and repay more than he owes, partly by way of restitution, partly by adding a compensation for the wrong which he has done. Yet how can he who is unable even to attain to the measure of his debts succeed in surpassing him? It was therefore impossible for any man to reconcile himself to God by introducing his own righteousness. Accordingly, neither could the old law overcome the enmity, nor would the unaided efforts of those who live under the new be capable of achieving this peace, since both the former and the latter are works of man's own power and of human righteousness. The very law itself Paul calls human righteousness. For in speaking of old law, he says, they did not submit to God's righteousness, seeking to establish their own. Its effectiveness against our evil condition was limited to this alone, to prepare us for health and to make us fit for the physician's hand. So he says, the law was our custodian until Christ, Galatians 3:24. Similarly, blessed John the Baptist, baptized in anticipation of him who was to come, and all the philosophy of men, and all their labor for true righteousness are no more than preliminaries and preparations. Wherefore, since we by our own means and of ourselves were unable to display righteousness, Christ himself became for us righteousness from God in consecration and redemption. He destroys the enmity in his flesh and reconciles us to God. This he accomplishes not merely by sharing our nature, nor was it only when he died for us, but at all times and for every man. He was crucified then. Now he hospitably entertains us whenever we in penitence ask forgiveness. He alone then was able to render all honor that is due to the Father, and make satisfaction for that which had been taken away. The former he achieved by his life, the latter by his death. The death which he died upon the cross to the Father's glory, he brought in to outweigh the injury which we had committed. In addition, he most abundantly made amends for the debt of honor which we owed for our sins. By his life, he paid all honor, both that which is befitted him to pay, and also that by which the Father ought to be honored. Even with the many great works by which he gave the greatest honor to the Father, he also offered his life, which was pure from every sin. He did this by fulfilling his own laws most exactly and perfectly, not only those which he himself observed, for as he says, I have kept my Father's commandments, but also those which he prescribed for the lives of men. He alone exemplified and implanted the heavenly philosophy on earth. This he did also by the very miracles of which he proclaimed the Father to be the author. And there is another passage from, I believe, the same work, and let me see if I can pull it up right quick. Okay, yes, here's the other passage from book 1, and I'll put it in the link so you can put it up there, Father Joseph.
Okay.
It's, and this might be a little bit, they're both to the point. This might help also. Okay. So this is from Book 1, Section 10 of The Life in Christ by St. Nicholas Cabesalis, Archbishop of Thessalonica, who reposed in 1392. He says, that death, that's the death of Christ, was precious beyond the power of human thought. And yet the Savior yielded himself to be sold to his murderers for a trifling sum, so that even this should be full of poverty and dishonor for him. By being bought, he willed to share the lot of a slave and be subject to outrageous treatment. He considered it gain to be dishonored for her sake. By being sold for a trifling sum, he would hint that he came freely, as a gift, to suffer death for the world. Willingly he died, having wronged no one, either for the sake of his own life or for the common good, supplying graces to his murderers far greater than they could wish or hope for. But why do I mention these things? It is God who died. It was God's blood which was shed upon the cross. What could be more precious than this death? What more awesome? How great a sin had human nature committed that needed so great a penalty to expiate it? How great was the wound that required the power of this remedy? It was necessary that sin should be abolished by some penalty, and that we, by paying a just penalty, should be cleared of the indictment of the sins which we have committed against God. He who has been punished for the things which he has committed will not be called to account for them again. But among men there was no one who, himself being guiltless, might have suffered for the others. Since no one could have sufficed for himself, even the whole race, could it have died 10,000 times, was unable to pay the debt, the penalty it deserved. What fitting penalty could that most wretched slave undergo, who had utterly destroyed the image of the king and acted contemptuously towards so great dignity? It was for this reason that the master, who is without sin, suffers many terrible things and dies and endures the blow. As man, he undertakes the cause of mankind. He releases our race from the indictment and gives freedom to the prisoners, since he himself, being God and Master, stood in no need therefore. I can bring up a few other things too, but I think that one thing that's clear is, obviously, we don't believe the idea that God the Father had some sort of like emotional breakdown where he really wanted to destroy all of humanity, and God the Son kind of got in the way and took all the beating that the Father was going to deliver to mankind. Not in this, because obviously that's kind of an anthropomorphism, all right, in the sense that as if God the Father had, as if he had some sort of human emotions. What they're talking about, obviously, is both the wrath of God and the justice, or the justice of God and the love of God. The justice and love, those are both two sides of the same coin. So now I remember growing up, and I heard a few times sermons that sort of implied things like Christ, when they sort of had like a heretical version of the descent into hell, where after Christ died on the cross, when Christ was dying on the cross, or at the garden, Christ was separated from the divinity of the Father. Because remember, our Lord says on the cross, my God, why hast thou forsaken me?" We know he's quoting basically Psalm 22. Saint Ambrose says he's speaking he's speaking also in the person of humanity. He's not saying God the Father is forsaking him. But there were Protestant preachers that believe God the Father temporarily forsook the Son. So obviously those are heresies. Obviously the Calvinist teaching that Christ only died for the elect, and God basically he hates the majority of mankind. I think like Jerome Zacchaeus in his book Absolute Predestination says something like God hated most of mankind from all eternity. He just simply made them to be objects of his hatred, which isn't God. I mean, I don't know who John Calvin's God was, but it was probably the devil, but it wasn't actually the true God.
Now, it's worth noting that St. Nicholas Cabasilas wrote this almost 200 years before Calvinism existed.
So, I mean, obviously, none of this is Calvinistic. I can't.
Yeah, exactly. There is an Orthodox concept of atonement. There always was, and this de-emphasis on it, to be quite honest, is really it's really a 20th century phenomenon. Like,
Christ died for our sins. That's true. I mean, obviously, it's true. We also believe that when our Lord offered the sacrifice of his body and blood on the cross in a bloody fashion for the sins of the whole world, when he became, when he did this, the whole Trinity accepted it. All right, he was both victim and priest. He was, offered and offerer. So it wasn't just a sacrifice only offered to the Father. He himself received it because he is God, as well as the Holy Ghost. I mean, there's in fact the canon in the Pedalion, or the Synodicon of the Holy Ghost, or the Greater Synodicon actually, that says we believe the entire Trinity received the sacrifice. And in fact, among us Western Orthodox, when we have the offertory and the priest offers at the offertory before the anaphora the holy gifts of the bread and wine, we say receive a Holy Trinity this oblation. All right, because of course the liturgy or the Mass is simply is identical in essence to the sacrifice of Christ on Calvary. It only differs in that it's an unbloody fashion. So atonement is a doctrine of the Church. Obviously, we don't have exaggerated or heretical views of atonement that destroy the unity of the Trinity or limit the soteriological possibilities and effects of Christ's blood shed on the cross. Nor do we agree with the views sometimes expressed by Metropolitan Anthony Propovitsky that the blood of Christ shed in the garden was somehow sufficient, which Anthony got censured for. And interestingly, other poll correctly pointed out that sounded like a Roman Catholic idea.
Yeah.
So
now I hate to say this, but a thought occurred to me. Because I mentioned this with the whole Joshua Shuping thing, that he was horrified to learn this, that for every person who's attracted by this method of taking away the concept of the atonement, how many people have we turned away with it? Not us personally, but how many people have been turned away by modernized, world orthodoxy, saying, "Oh no, there is no atonement."
Well, remember,
Oh, Sava says, wasn't that Metropolitan Anastasia that said that? No,
No, that was
Metropolitan
Anthony
An-
Pravovitsky.
Yeah,
Anthony
the
Pravovitsky.
book is The Dogma of Redemption.
Yes.
Continue, Vladika. Sorry about that.
In fact, here I'm going to put another link. It's from the Catechism, the larger Russian Catechism, the longer Russian Catechism. And
Okay.
I'm going to read from it real quick. Let me see if I can get to. I don't know where I'm at. Are you there?
Yeah.
I do. I see. I can't see my tabs. My Windows is set up so that I can't see the top of my tabs. Okay, here it is. Okay, so go to. I'll tell you what page to go to.
I'm going to it right now.
So go to question 208.
208.
Yes.
Okay, one moment.
It should say, "How does the death of Jesus Christ upon the cross?"
Yep. I'm just making it bigger.
Okay.
Okay, and share. One moment.
Okay. So the question from the Orthodox Catechism is, how does the death of Jesus Christ upon the cross deliver us from sin, the curse, and the death? And the answer is that we may the more readily believe this mystery the Word of God teaches us of it, so much as we may be able to receive by the comparison of Jesus Christ with Adam. Adam is by nature the head of all mankind, which is one with him by natural descent from him. Jesus Christ, in whom the Godhead is united with manhood, graciously made himself the new almighty head of men, whom he unites to himself through faith. Therefore, as in Adam we had fallen under sin, the curse and death, so we are delivered from sin, the curse and death in Jesus Christ. His voluntary suffering and death on the cross for us being of infinite value. So what? His voluntary suffering and death on the cross for us being of infinite value and merit, as the death of one sinless, godly man in one person, is both a perfect satisfaction to the justice of God, which had condemned us for sin to death, and a fund of infinite merit, which has obtained him the right, without prejudice to justice, to give us sinners pardon of our sins and the grace to have victory over sin and death. And they give and here are the scriptural quotations that the Catechism gives. Colossians 1:26 and 27. God hath willed to make known to his saints what is the riches of the glory of this mystery of the Gentiles, which is Christ in you, the hope of glory, Romans 5:17. For if by one man's offense death reigned by one, much more they which receive abundance of grace and of the gift of righteousness shall reign in life by one, Jesus Christ. Romans 8:1-4. There is therefore now no condemnation to them which are in Christ Jesus, who walk not after the flesh, but after the Spirit. For the law of the Spirit of life in Christ Jesus hath made me free from the law of sin and death. For what the law could not do, in that it was weak through the flesh, God sending his own Son in the likeness of sinful flesh, and for sin condemned sin in the flesh, that the righteousness of the law might be fulfilled in us, who walk not after the flesh, but after the Spirit. Was it for all, strictly speaking, that Jesus Christ suffered? For his part, he offered himself as a sacrifice strictly for all, and obtained for all grace and salvation. But this benefits only those of us, for their parts, of their own free will, have fellowship in his suffering, being made conformable unto his death. And how do we have fellowship in the sufferings and death of Jesus Christ? We have fellowship in the sufferings and death of Jesus Christ through a lively and hearty faith, through the sacraments in which is contained and sealed the virtue of his saving suffering and death, and lastly, through the crucifixion of our flesh in its affections and lusts. Obviously, the baptism, and the chrismation, the Eucharist, and we have to have a lively faith and our participation in the sacraments, repentance, and trust in Christ, and the mortification of our flesh, and that's part of a lively faith.
Now, this was from the longer Catechism, also known as the Russian Catechism of Metropolitan Filaret. I believe that's 18th century.
No, that's 1850.
Oh, so that's 19th century.
So
No,
I could pull up the Kievan Catechism from the 1600s,
right? But the
and
point
of course the Kievan Catechism, by the way, by people may say, well, it was written by Peter McGill, as if that's a bad thing, but it was reviewed by all the patriarchs. It was reviewed by 7 or 8 councils. Emendations were made to it, and it says pretty much the same thing.
Right, and you can point to Jerusalem, etc. The point is, there's a long tradition before and after Calvinism of the atonement. There's no reason to hide from it or to be. It's part of Christian teaching. It's just that I think that there's an over exaggeration to kind of take away from that. Does that, Aaron? Does that help?
Yeah, no, it was a very strange thing when y'all mentioned it for me because I realized that I hadn't heard the Orthodox kind of take on it because of how vital a part the atonement plays in Torah.
Now it's interesting if you there's a book that deals with the history of the attempts to introduce kind of what's called the moral monistic view of the atonement into Orthodoxy, and which is sort of Romanides took that view over several others. That was Vladimir Moss's book, all right, and that's called Dogma of the Atonement, I believe, right, Father? Because remember, there were several fathers in the late 19th century and early 20th century who saw that there was this attempt to de-emphasize that fact that Jesus Christ our Lord, according to the scriptures, the fathers died on the cross for the sins of mankind, and he offered himself up as a sacrifice in our stead. And they saw that for whatever reason, men were, I mean, obviously it was a spiritual attack. Men were attempting to say, oh, Christ only died on the cross sort of as a example. That's all it was. Now, this is not to deny that. I mean, there are multiple ways of expressing the truth, the dogmatic truth of the atonement.
Right. There's levels to it, and
Yeah.
you can't
Like we talk about
the more obvious. For
exactly. Yeah. Exactly. Like Christ died in our place. I mean, the other views are, for example, sometimes called the ransom theory of the atonement, which the fathers talk about. Christus Victor, which they like Christ. I mean, they're all true. There's no reason that it's only when you start trying to emphasize one and say the others are heretical or something like that, which many of the modernists do, that you come up into problems. And part of the issue is this: they want to talk about Anselm. I've not read the works of Anselm except a few things. I've had to deal with him a little bit because he was a Hildebrandian. And they say, they say things like St. Gregory Palamas and St. Nicholas Cabassalis and all the Byzantine fathers were basically under Latin influence from Anselm. I mean, we're getting to really, really problematic issues if we're claiming that the fathers in the 1300s simply were reading like a Roman Catholic writer and be like, well, I guess I'm going to change my doctrine now to... there's
that's
some
really
problem.
Dumb.
Yeah,
I know.
it's
Real
that is
problems.
welcome to modern scholarship, Aaron.
So, I mean, I've not read the entirety of Anselm's Cur Deus Homo, so I can't tell what is good or what's bad in it. But that's not my main concern to say that if Anselm agreed with the church, then fine. If he didn't, then he disagreed with the church on a lot of other issues. So that's neither here nor there. But I think that's the real issue, and this is one of the problems I have with a lot of modernist scholarship, and even people like, there's the renovationists from the so-called left, and then the renovationists from the so-called right. All right, and the problem I've encountered with a lot of them is they do not address in any meaningful way the historical. I'm trying to not sound like a modern scholar. The historical encounter, I guess. So they can say things like, there was this Latin captivity in the Orthodox Church for 600 years. All right. Well, why is it none of the fathers realized that they were teaching heretical Latin doctrines for 600 years? There's there's something terrible going on if that's your theory. All right. What is your explanation as to why you know better you're writing a book in 1970 than St. Gregory Palamas or St. Nicholas Cabassalis? And they give no explanation. Their explanation, if they give any, is simply that modern scholarship allows you to have a wide range of free opinions. The fathers didn't have critical modern understandings of freedom of intellectual expression or something like that, and therefore they know more than the fathers. That's essentially what it comes down to. Or they'll do something insulting if they claim they're Orthodox. They'll talk about Saint so-and-so, but then if there's a father they don't like, he suddenly becomes Gregory or John. I don't know if you've seen that before. I've seen that particularly in various writings. And like, for example, someone will say they don't like the Telonia. Okay, well then suddenly
The Telonia are the toll houses.
yeah,
for those,
yeah. So they don't like. So then, therefore, they're going to quote, I don't know, Saint Anastasius of Sinai, supposedly saying something in a way that they think justifies an anti-Telonia opinion, even if it really doesn't. They'll say Saint Anastasius says this. Then it'll suddenly be, this certainly disagrees with Patriarch John of Constantinople. Who's Patriarch John of Constantinople? That's Saint John Chrysostom they're talking about. Why aren't they calling him Saint John Chrysostom? All right, because if they just call him John or something, it de-emphasizes. Because otherwise, they're going to have to say, "Well, Saint John said this." All right.
Yeah, they don't want to. They don't want to attach that.
Or it's like there are some other modern scholars. There's one who wrote a book called Aristotle East and West, I think. And I saw an interview with David Bradshaw or something. I'm not personally attacking him. I just the way they go about things, I think, is divorced entirely from an Orthodox understanding. And I think he said something like he was amazed that for 700 years before the Great Schism, that everybody was concerned about these minor issues like the filioque and unleavened bread and the papal supremacy, whereas the real issue was the inability to understand that there was a fundamental divide between, like the essence energy. That was his big things. Okay, so his view is that sort of like the West went wrong around Tertullian, and then St. Augustine finished it off, and it was really not an Orthodox part of the church ever from the 3rd and 4th century. And for somehow the fathers in the East and West communicated with each other for hundreds of years and just never
noticed.
Yeah, there's the Holy Ghost simply. It's almost implying the Holy Ghost wasn't able to do anything. But I think they have a modernist understanding of how God interacts in history. Their view is essentially God doesn't interact in history, even if they would take offense at me saying that. The presuppositions of how they write things in secular scholarship
implies that.
Yes. So they would. I mean, for example, Patrick Trulia, Craig, right? And I think he somewhere said, and I agreed with him that he embraced sort of a harmonization ethic, not ethic, or a hermeneutic of the fathers. Okay.
Yeah.
Because his view is that, well, if they're fathers, then we have to give all of them the benefit of the doubt. All right.
Correct.
We don't immediately go to the worst possible conclusion that a secular scholar says. All right. Because we aren't necessarily dealing with, some professor of academic so-called theology in Athens or in Paris or whatever. You're dealing with figures who were holy men and are venerated in the church, and that's an objective fact. All right. So before you say something about them, be very careful how you say it and what you're going to say, because otherwise you end up going the Boston route and you take St. Isidore off the calendar, or you anathematize him. You anathematize St. Augustine. You take St. Theodore of Canterbury off the calendar. You essentially and then you just start calling these various figures like St. Leo the Great and St. Gregory, or Leo.
Right. It becomes denigration.
And mark my words, and many people like that have already done this. They're well on the route to removing St. Gregory Dialogus from the calendar. That's about that. A lot of them have already started.
And that would be like shooting yourself in the foot. Because
remember, what they're saying, what they're basing various materials on a book called the Pseudo Dialogues of Gregory the Great, which was written by a Roman Catholic scholar, Francis Pseudo Gregorian Dialogues. You see, written by Francis Clark. And Francis Clark originally argued back in the 70s that the dialogues of St. Gregory the Great were not written by St. Gregory. They were written by sort of like a Frankish monk in the 680s. And he also claimed that St. Benedict never existed. So of course,
that's just once you get to that point.
Yeah, of course the Hackna people, they love this because they could just say everything else was fraudulent. And others, and I pointed others have said this. And now we have manuscripts of the dialogues that go back to like 680 or 670. St. Gregory the Great proposed in 604. That's pretty close in terms of ancient manuscripts to find things like that. Well, the explanation was that if you look at the dialogues, they contain miracle stories. Francis Clark argues St. Gregory was refined Roman aristocrat theologian, and he wouldn't have gone down for these gutter stories of miracles. It almost sounds like this man is like, what is he, from the upper class of Europe, Britain, or America? It almost sounds like an elitist understanding of things.
Yeah, I'll just leave it at elitist, because you run the risk. I have some thoughts on the Aristotle.
That's a nice way of putting it.
Now, what happened with this work is he has had to revise it because they have found a little bit earlier manuscript. Again, he's got to the point where he's had to say, well, the core of the dialogues were written by St. Gregory, but some scribes in the 680s combined them together. But, because there's been so much pushback against this. Now, you have Roman Catholic publication house like Cistercian Publishing, which do publish actually good translations like St. Cyril's Scathophyllus and various stuff. But they have one of their Cistercians ostensibly in Roman Catholicism are monks who claim to follow the rule of Saint Benedict, by the way, or Bruno following Benedict or something like that. Okay, Saint Benedict. But a lot of those Cistercian publishing house figures are saying things like they feel liberated knowing Saint Benedict never existed. Which even Francis Clark Francis Clark has himself had to backtrack and say, well, Saint Benedict did exist. There is, I think they've uncovered earlier like inscriptions and things like that, but they're having to say, well, Saint Benedict didn't write the role of Saint Benedict because the earliest manuscript is like 680. The problem is that and Saint Benedict reposed in the mid 500s. But here's the thing: Francis Clark and others have no problem saying Saint Basil wrote the larger and greater so-called rules, letters and such. When is the earliest I think the earliest manuscript of those from Saint Basil comes from 300 to 100 years after Saint Basil reposed, but no one has questioned those.
Right. We have their underlying presuppositions in general are towards destruction. There's no doubt about that.
Deconstruction and deconstruction.
Deconstruction.
Destruction through destruction through deconstruction. Yes.
Yeah. So basically, I think, Aaron, did that answer your question about the atonement?
Yeah. The only other thing in regards to atonement I was going to ask is, would it be appropriate to look at Christ's atonement through the lens of the atonement ritual in the first temple?
I think the atonement ritual in the first temple. You mean like the Day of Atonement?
The Day of Atonement, yes, sir.
Well, I think so because look at the book of the Epistle to the Hebrews. All right, and it refers to the high priest going into the Holy of Holies with the blood. All right, and Saint Paul compares that to Christ going into heaven. All right, and
it would be a type.
So in other words, yes. So Christ is our great high priest. All right, and everything that happened in the Old Testament temple is, as Father Joseph said, it's a type. It's a foreshadowing in a mystical way of what Christ does. Is a shadow of what he does in reality.
Right.
So I think I think absolutely.
Yeah.
All those sacrifices are going to be prefigurement of the one great sacrifice that as Saint John Chrysostom says, Christians have only one real sacrifice now, and that's Jesus Christ's sacrifice on the cross.
The only one that's necessary.
Exactly. And so all the other, we can speak about, we have sacrifices of prayer and thanksgiving when we pray and we give up, but all of those are connected ultimately in the sense that they come from, they're made, the only reason we do anything that has any worth is because of what Christ did and such.
Absolutely.
So.
Okay. So now, Aaron, thank you again for your questions. That was really useful, and frankly, that's probably going to become a clip this week. All right.
Thank you.
Have a great night, and let's move on. And we have Sava.
Hello.
Hey,
sorry, the mic was muted.
No problem. What's your question?
Is my audio good?
Yeah, you sound great.
Okay. Yes. So the question I have might be an odd question. I don't know if either of you have heard this, but back in like the 1970s or something, Rocor had a parish in Iraq. It's talking about Iraq earlier, but they had this parish in Iraq that was Nestorians that converted to Orthodoxy. And they did it with a Byzantine rite, but they allowed the Nestorians, the former Nestorians that converted to Orthodoxy, Rocor after all, to like use like East Syriac vestments and to use East Syriac prayer books or something in certain parts of the liturgy. Do you think what they did with the Western Rite and Orthodox could ever be done with something like the East Syriac Rite?
I recall back in the 1800s, before Roque, if I don't know that specific case about Roquefort doing that, but I do know back in the 1890s, the Russian Church did have a commission about the various, the Monophysite and the Nestorians about this exact question. The problem is they were, and I don't mean to be, obviously, it's going to be a little bit negative, is they were more negative, not entirely, but they were more skeptical of doing it with some of those rites. And the reason is that when you deal with like the Western rites, you're dealing with manuscript traditions that precede any existing Byzantine manuscript traditions in many cases. So you can go back to the Leonine Sacramentary from the 550s, or various sacramentaries from the 700s and 600s, and you have this like line you can confirm what was being done within the time of the church. The problem with, let's say, the East Syriac Rite is I think the earliest liturgical manuscript they have is maybe some revisions, maybe from like 1000 AD. And I think that was sort of the issue that, I'm not saying that doesn't necessarily reflect earlier usages, but it's going to open yourself up to a lot more problems. I think that was the issue. Now, what people forget sometimes is in the East Syriac, even let's just say that like the Syrian Church, the East, the Nestorians and such, up until the 12th, 13th, and 14th century, they in fact use their own, in many places, use their own variants of the liturgies of St. Chrysostom, St. Basil, and others. All right, because there is this common trend among various Eastern rites where, and you see this in the standard typicon of the Great Church, that you have, let's say, on most of the days it's St. John Chrysostom, all right, but on Sundays in Lent, right, and Saturdays in Lent, you have liturgy of St. Basil. And if it wasn't for most of it's to a regular person's not going to hear the priest, assuming they have a deacon, is not going to hear the priest saying the different secret prayers that are said during the litanies. There are some differences, like some hymns are a little bit different, but they're basically the same. And so I think there was a similar idea with the East Syrians where they still do this. Like the Nestorians will have this common ordo of their liturgy, and on some days they will use the anaphora of Mari and of Adai, and some days the anaphora of Nestorius, and on some days the anaphora of Theodore Montsuestia, and such. So I think there were cases of them using St. John Chrysostom's anaphora. Now the liturgy of St. James actually has a greater privilege. But anyway, my point was that you have to look at the manuscript tradition. And because again, Western, I hate to be sound idiosyncratic, but when you deal with Western Rite, you're really dealing with something that is of immense antiquity in terms of its manuscript trail. When you're dealing with Middle Eastern materials, especially from Monophysite and Nestorian, or even if they're pre that, you're talking about cases where they hardly have any of their ancient. They don't have manuscripts in many cases that go back even before the late medieval period, because the Muslims destroyed everything. All right, I'm not blaming them for not having a manuscript from 400 AD. All right, if the Muslims take over Mosul and then burn the Nestorian Patriarch's library of 10,000 books or something like that, well, you have a major problem that's going on.
Well, I think that I think especially when we're talking about comparison to the Western Rite, when you're dealing with the situation in the Middle East.
One more thing, I like to bring up one more thing for you.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry. By the way, the vestments used by Nestorians, those are things they adopted in the past 200 years. Those vestments, where it looks like, you know what it looks like? It's a cope with a Western style stole, which is not necessarily bad, but that's not the original vestments we know from paintings and images and things like that. Those, like you look at all the Monophysites, almost all the Monophysites and the Nestorians use largely vestments that look very similar. All right, but if you look in, let's say, medieval images of Armenians, of the Armenian separated Armenian Monophysites, their vestments, you know, it looks like They look like they're wearing an alb stacharion. Okay, they have a zone. They have a stole. It's maybe not connected. Maybe it looks Byzantine sometimes. Maybe it looks the old Western way. And over that they have a conical chasuble, which was the antecedent vestment of the Thelonian. Okay, they didn't adopt a lot of that stuff until later. And even early images, I believe, we have of Nestorian priests from the medieval period shows almost something very much the same. So even you look at the Assyrian Church of the East, how they design their churches, it's heavily influenced by Chaldean Unit designs. All right.
Well, yeah, there was a lot of Latin missionary work for hundreds of years in
There was
that
a
area.
Chaldean unit rite that was heavily Latin, Tridentinized.
Or the Maronites, etc.
Yeah, the Maronites essentially used the liturgy of Saint James and a Syriac variant, and they just simply adopted Tridentine, Baroque, late Roman Catholic mutilated vestments, and their church designs became identical to 19th century French churches in many cases.
So yeah, the question is, when you're looking at it, it's like even the exteriors of what is going on with the converted Nestorian groups, etc. Those are ultimately later Latinizations. The Western
now, by the way, the Russian Church did allow just real quick. The Russian Church did allow an approved version of the liturgy of Adai Mare to be used in the early 20th century. Now, most of those people who used it were killed by the Persians, and the Muslims ended up killing like 100,000 Orthodox Assyrians. Most of them were massacred, and there were a few thousand that fled to the United States. There was a famous Bishop John who died at 100 years old at Novodevia. Anyway, I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, what I was going to say is that now keep in mind that we do want to emphasize when we're talking about the Western Rite. The Western Rite among Orthodox traditionalists, among true Orthodox, and the Western Rite in, say, like modern world Orthodoxy are not the same thing. We're talking about basically on our end, it's just pre-schism uses, which in some ways is similar to the stuff used in the modernist Western rites, but there's no accretions of the Baroque and later periods, whereas that seems to be almost a sticking point.
We also tend to have an entirely different ideological worldview.
Right, it's completely different. And now that's one thing I should mention. The other thing, yeah, and the other thing that I wanted to mention, now I just lost it in my mind. But the point is that.
But if my view is that if they could find some ancient manuscripts that go back before their schisms, then you could look at something. But can they find something before the year 431?
Now I remember. It was the liturgy of St. Peter that was found on Mount Athos. And this is one of the things that I think is a principle that's been applied pretty commonly, especially with conversions from these groups, is that the silent parts are quietly replaced and can be changed in and out. The liturgy of St. Peter that was found on Mount Athos effectively keeps the Roman canon, but turns everything else into a Byzantine liturgy.
Well, they do have the glory in excelsis I used at the beginning, and they do add the Agnus Dei. That particular
That's
liturgy,
about it.
Yes, that particular liturgy derives from. The question is where it derives from. Now,
I thought it was from Hillendar.
Well, Saint Euthemius. Well, I'm talking about the ancient origins.
Okay.
Not the manuscript. Saint Euthemius of the Holy Mountain, who was a Georgian writer from the 11th century, says that in Greece, or the area called Greece, I think it's Illyria Major or something. It used to be everyone used either the liturgy of St. Peter in some areas, or he says the liturgy of St. James. They kind of stopped using the liturgy of St. James because when it is done properly, it's a very long liturgy.
Yeah.
It's talking about 3 hours. It's not like a 80, 90, 100 minute liturgy. Like in the Russian Imperial Chapel, in the 19th century, and if you do the liturgy of St. John Chrysostom without a sermon, and all the replies are given, there's no space in between, and it's a weekday and there's nothing special, you can be done in 60, 70 minutes and things like that, assuming no one's taking communion, right? And everything is, arranged perfectly, right? Obviously, that's not a Sunday liturgy and what have you. But there seems to be some evidence that in Greece, people did it. See, this actually makes sense. And if you look at the history of the Church of Old Rome and how they went about things, in the 500s, one of the popes sent a copy of the Canon of the Mass into Spain, and he said, "I like this, and maybe you want to use it, okay?" And the Spanish bishop's reply was that this is nice, thanks, and they didn't really use anything.
Yeah.
The purpose of Rome times was hoping, like, maybe they could get people. I'm not necessarily for bad reasons. It's just they wanted people to use their prayers. You can make of that what you will. I think it's depending on the circumstances. I use this phrase. There's sainted. They oftentimes would get people to adopt certain things in the hope that maybe they would adopt the full thing. It didn't always work. It didn't work like that. Never. So the idea, there is a speculation that because Thessalonica was traditionally the archbishop in Illyria, that which is like Greece, Macedonia, modern day, former Yugoslavia, etc. And that area was technically under the Roman Patriarchate. They at least acknowledged that Rome as their patriarchate unto the 700s. That they would adopt the Roman canon, like you said, these parts for the liturgy, the secret parts, all right?
Yeah.
As a way of honoring their patriarch. They didn't miss and such. That makes sense. But I think again the problem with the Assyrian example is just the problem with my issue is problem with the manuscript tradition. Secondly, what is the worldview of the people? Is it just are you just doing something different liturgically because you're interested in, I don't know, whatever?
The motivation has to be
Motivation.
clear.
Exactly.
Is this going to...
But there's a practical problem with manuscript issues that simply does not present itself in the Western Rite. And that's what I'd say. I don't know what else to say other than that. Other than you could apply this also if you start talking about the various Monophysites. It's not so much a big issue in the case of the Coptic Church.
Yeah,
that's different because remember, we had an Orthodox Patriarch of Alexander that used the liturgy in St. Mark for a very long time. All right, and we do know from manuscript studies that the ancient liturgy of St. Mark, as used by the Orthodox, and St. Nectarius revived that in the 1880s, I believe. That was much closer to what St. Cyril of Alexandria used than what the Coptic Church. The Coptic Church had a number of abolitions to the liturgy. For example, they abolished. There was some sort of an entrance. It may not be exactly like the great entrance where the deacons brought in the gifts. They abolished that. They abolished the liturgy of the presanctified, which was a common practice. That was done away with in the 12th century in the Coptic Church, I believe. In some of these cases, we talk about the Copts and the Orthodox in Egypt. You're talking about two churches that originally did the same liturgy, Father Joseph, and then the Monophysites began to alter stuff, because almost intentionally to differentiate themselves from the church. All right. So anyway, sorry.
No, that's fine. I hope that answers the question there, Sava. If you had any other questions, or
I don't know if there was. There are some people who discuss the question of Saint Isaac the Syrian. That's not quite exactly related, but what liturgy did he use and such like that. The issue, the other issue with the liturgy of Arai Mare is oftentimes people bring up the fact that there is no narration of institution in the liturgy. But there's also
they had to add one in the Roman.
By the way, there's also no epiclesis that corresponds to the epiclesis in the Eastern liturgies either. All it has is a prayer that says, "May Thy Holy Spirit rest upon this oblation." That's it. That's all they say. So there are and of course St. John. It's of course it was a view held by and I think it's a correct view by St. Cassius Radbertus, who was the abbot of Corbie, that you needed both the narration and the invocation, which is a view later taken up by figures like St. Mark of Ephesus and such like that. Now,
all right.
Okay, so.
Sava, did you have any other questions?
I do not have any other questions, and that one that was a very sufficient answer. Thank you for having me on.
Awesome. Well, have a great night, and may have a great fast as well.
Oh, you too. Thank you, Father.
All right. So we've
We have one last question, I think, and so I'm going to put that up, and it hits a little bit closer to home, and that is Flying G Tech asks, "What is the brief overview of the origins of your synod?"
we'll bring up the church history section of the website, Father
Oh
Joseph.
boy, oh boy.
That's
Here we go.
It's right over there. I just
Here we go. One moment. Let me get.
It's up there for a reason.
All right, we're not going to read the whole thing.
No, we don't have to. But
it's a pretty. Just go by the picture.
It is brief in terms of the brief history.
brief compared to a book is.
The brief history is that the Autonomous Orthodox Metropolia was originally formed from dioceses in Portugal and in Italy of the Two Orthodox Church of Greece, and in 1984. Metropolitan Gabriel, who was our primate at the time, was given a Tomos of Autonomy, Archbishop Xentius. In 1990, Metropolitan Gabriel, unfortunately, with his people in Portugal, simply left and they joined the Polish Church, and they left her in there. And Metropolitan, at that time, just Bishop of Logius, was Bishop Gregory of Turin, and Bishop Basil said, "Look, we're not going to just join. We don't want to give up being who we are." And so they elected Metropolitan Vlogius in 1990 to be metropolitan. He was a ruling bishop at the time, but he wasn't metropolitan until 1990. And in 2011, what? Say that again.
Oh, I said, "Wow." I mean, I know I did mention making it shorter, but what if you just got on?
Oh, okay, yeah. So okay.
Well,
in 1997, our synod took in like the monastery here, and various
Texas.
Yes, various American West Rite Orthodox communities, and they became the basis of our church at this point. I mean, of course, there are others as well. And then in 1998, we had already recognized Archbishop Maximus as the time legitimate primate of the Church of Greece, and he recognized our then Metropolitan of Logius as not just autonomous, but as an autocephalous metropolitan. By the way, it's not quite talked about all the time, but that actually happened. And then in 2011, our Archbishop in America, Archbishop John, was given a tomos to become an autonomous. Our metropoly was divided into two metropolitan autonomous areas, and that's where we are today. Now, of course, the one that existed in Italy, went into a disastrous phase where Metropolitan Vlogius was convinced to join the Moscow Patriarchate, which is predictably a disaster. He gave them all the buildings, and thankfully he didn't give them the Lazaretto because they would have kicked them out on the street. And he then gradually went into senility in the next 7 years, like with Alzheimer's and things like that. He died in 2019, I believe.
Okay.
But I mean, that's the short. You can read the whole thing.
Yeah, that's really short. I'm going to try to
fill in some blanks. John, so
yeah, I'm going to try to fill in some blanks because that was
they asked for a brief
really
history.
Short.
He asked for a brief history.
Yes, he did, and that was brief. A couple of pieces. I'm going to fill in some blanks because I know there's going to be people ask questions, and they've asked questions about our synod. So I want to see if I can knock them out one by one.
Okay.
In the first place, in the first place, we received the Portuguese bishops received this autonomy from Archbishop Xentius in 1984. They were received into the Church of Greece in 1978. That act, because there was a corrective baptism and ordination involved.
There were no corrective ordinations done, by the way.
I was under. That's what
that's Hockner claims that happened.
Oh, okay. So that actually did not happen.
What actually happened was when they went to Greece, Archbishop Xentius said, "Well, he said you just got to do. I have to go corrective baptism, but that's it. I'm not." Anyway, that's all.
Right. So the point is, there was a controversy over that. That became at least the excuse that I've read for Roquefort to break communion with the True Orthodox Church of Greece.
Because otherwise, if they had a corrective ordination, it would sort of be denying Roquefort ordination. So they didn't want to.
Right. Yeah. I think it was. I thought it was just corrective baptism. If I misspoke, I apologize.
No. I'm just saying it's a comment. I used to think that until I actually contacted some of the people over in Portugal, and they gave me various historical sources about this
Right.
actual question. Okay.
And so, to add to that, so basically, this church was originally formed from parishes in Western Europe who were disaffected, most likely by the aftermath of Vatican II. They joined the True Orthodox Church of Greece. Basically, they were given autonomy in 1984. This would be 1 year before the show trial of Archbishop Maxentius in 1985. There were periods, and in which we, Metropolitan of Logos, kept communication with groups like the Ukrainian Autocephalous Church. Our synod, as we know it now, were brought in as dioceses of the Milan Synod, which was the most common name for it at the time.
The name we invented, by the way, after we joined.
Yeah,
After those
well,
dioceses
it sounds nice because Milan and Metropolitan of Logos did take that very seriously.
Yes,
in
he
the
did.
sense that it was a restored see, because Milan was an autonomous diocese before the schism.
Yes, and he was actually at his best when he kept to the old ideology that we talked about of
Yeah.
restoring the see. When he moved away from that, that's always when problems began. Okay, go.
Yeah, but then basically when he was given the autonomy by Archbishop Maxentius in 1984, he kind of was given a warning to just remain kind of independent. This led to other things, which of course you can read on the history section of our website, where he did assist other bishops in forming other dioceses in True Orthodoxy, most notably the Synod in Resistance. This led.
I mean, he created them basically.
Yeah, the point is that also, as much as no good deed goes unpunished, and so ultimately, he got a lot of hatred and flack, and he had and was comfortable with the use of Western rites. This was also kind of like a big no-no, not just in True Orthodoxy, but if you are in World Orthodoxy, most people say Western rites a no-no, even though we were much more serious about it. There's all sorts of interesting history there. I wrote a book about it. We have the history, which is also really long, which has even more information. The point is that there's a lot there. And ultimately, in 2011, right around the time he established communion with Metropolitan Angelos of Avlonos in Greece, basically, we were given autonomy to self-govern. And so, for whatever reason, and we are writing an article. I personally think this was because it might have been because of slanders against him. He decided to just give up and go to the Moscow Patriarchate. We obviously thought this was unacceptable, expressed it in no unclear terms, and unfortunately, he went his own way, and he discovered before the end that there would be no kind of peaceful rapprochement with Moscow, and he kind of died alone. I don't think that our church has settled how to, I don't know if we commemorate.
Metropolitan Angelos did send a bishop to go to the funeral because he did seem to be sorry that he made. I think what happened is he was in a position that we weren't really willing because of the bad. I used to speak like a bad blood. We weren't really in a position because of people around him to go back into communion with him. And I mean, and so I think the problem was that he probably thought he had made such a bad situation of things he couldn't really, and he was already 90 or so.
Yeah, so I mean,
I knew a priest over there who said no, he's like his mind was already gone last year, almost. Wow. He was having problems.
Well, he was, I think that overall, if you count,
and it wasn't gone, but he had a lot of lapses of memory. So.
Yeah, but when you can look at his overall life from the beginning of the synod, overall, I think overall it's a net positive for the church.
Yes.
And I hope that he does find rest among the saints. As for our synod, that's kind of where we come from, and that's what we keep doing. And so that's how things are. But again, if you want to read about it, you can go to orthodoxmetropolia.org, and you can always look at the history of our synod, which is long, and there's lots of fun pictures and things like that. So I hope someone
contacted.
God bless. And then what?
Someone contacted us the other day.
Really?
And they said, why don't you join Hakna? And we said, I don't know why.
I would recommend.
First off, we had a lot. I said, my explanation was that if Hakna is really this interested in us joining them, let's have them call us.
Yeah.
I don't call you. You call me. How about that?
Yeah. I would recommend this.
We were never joined them, by the way.
Yeah, I mean, historically, I mean,
there's a lot of nefarious activity that goes on in the both the World Orthodox and Orthodox world. I'm not saying that amounts to basically trying to pretend you contact somebody under pretenses that you're seeking to learn from. I'm not saying this guy is doing this. Is not.
Yeah,
I'm saying
I'm sure he had more innocent logic than.
Yeah.
It's not the one thing we have to remember.
The result is a lot of people avoid giving answers, and we're the ones who oftentimes will be completely open about our history because others won't be because they're afraid of getting.
Well, here, let me put it to you this way, though. I will say this to people who do ask that a lot of the things that have happened between jurisdictions, between us and Hakna, for example, are relegated largely to history. The ecclesiastical game board of 25 years ago, if we are to put bishops, etc., on the board, doesn't look the same. There are still people who like to retread old rumors and slanders. I think that Hakna, they've gotten themselves into a number of controversies on their own. That they need to kind of make peace with their own people about those who left them, etc. They need to kind of work with that. But as for us, I think Bishop Moses' departure letter, which is on nftu.net, I would recommend looking at that because it even mentions our own autonomy, Tomos. Even though,
and remember, if somebody from Greece contacts us and says they want to talk to us, look,
we're going to refer to Greece.
Yeah, because look, we're not going to make some kind of agreement or even engage in discussions formally with people whose headquarters is in Greece. Especially when
Russia.
We have a church in Greece, or Russia when we have churches that we're in communion with there.
Yeah, just reach out to them.
I'll give you an example. Like our Metropolitan Seraphim in Russia, he has discussions with Roak. He has invited Metropolitan Theodore to their synod meeting, and Metropolitan Theodore has gone at least once or twice. The Metropolitan Seraphim's view is that, okay, here's our positions. What is your position? What do you think? What would you want us to do? What do you want us to say? If you had to, you give us, your views.
Right.
And in turn, Metropolitan Theodore will explain his position, and he'll say, I invite you to liturgy. And he, invited Metropolitan Seraphim to one of their liturgies at their synod, and, he was, received in a, somewhat formal way. And they were on friendly terms, all right? That doesn't mean there's like a concelebration going on.
Right.
But the point is, if they both have the same, have similar documents and such,
and the same doctrine,
exactly, and they're on friendly terms, what has to be done to resolve any canonical situations between the two for communion? And that has to be discussed between them. I can't get involved in
now,
that.
On the issue of Hakna, because they are primarily an American body, sure, reach out to us. Give us a call.
Okay.
That we're now granted, we're going to bring up the elephant in the room that caused the schism 10 years ago.
Bring up a lot of stuff.
Yeah, like the Yugoslavia thing. We might have to have a little discussion about that. But yeah, we're open to talking to anyone who wants to talk.
We're going to bring up stuff about why they anathematize fathers of the church like St. Augustine.
Why do they still do that?
They do. Why do they claim the Fifth Ecumenical Council was wrong to name him? Gregory of Colorado is in the same boat.
Well, yeah, but they're not in communion with each other, and Gregory has his own views.
Look, I accept the Fifth Ecumenical Council, and I believe when it enumerated the 12 approved Orthodox fathers, that I accept those fathers.
Yeah, no, I agree.
And if you don't accept St. Augustine as the father, then I'm not going to be in communion with you because that's it. Okay. Anyway,
the point is that that's a prerequisite. It's basic, accepting the fullness of the council.
And I don't want to hear any of this stuff about, it was an appended from another council.
Yeah, no,
the church accepted those acts of the council numerous times over and over and over again. Everybody had a chance to. Exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
That's more. That's a lot of people, and more people have.
I think this is going to be our last question of the evening. Healing News asks, greatest saint of the 20th century in your opinion, and why? This question for Father Joseph and Bishop Enoch.
Okay, Father Joseph, you answer.
That's a weird question.
I'll give my
I
answer.
mean, I say it's weird. Like, my namesake came from the 20th century. I mean, St. Joseph of Petrograd, but I mean, like, I guess I just don't think of saints in terms of the greatest if there's no kind of rank. I mean, the apostles are the greatest. Like, St. John of Shanghai is often considered an equal to the apostles. I have a personal devotion to St. Alexis. Go ahead.
It's apostle, not apostle.
Oh, no. Another pronunciation.
Continue.
Okay. Anyway, the point is, so that's a hard question to ask because we're talking about saints. It's like, they're not baseball cards. I mean, these are people whose lives we strive to emulate. I can't. For me, it's hard for me to be like, okay, well, I've read this. This is clearly the greatest saint of the 20th century. I would feel weird. I feel weird saying that even as not serious. We
could almost rephrase it. With the greatest saints of the 20th century would be.
If we said saints of the 20th century, then
it's going to be it's new martyrs.
New martyrs
of Russia,
St. John of Shanghai, the new martyrs in Greece. Honestly, all the new martyrs and all the new confessors of the church. People don't realize it, but because of the historical situation that true Orthodoxy was in the 20th century, we produced more saints and martyrs than any other period in history.
If somebody asked you who was the greatest saint of the 5th century, the 400s, well, I don't know, because if I said Saint Kirill, I'd be leaving out Saint Leo the Great. If I said Saint Leo the Great, I'd be leaving out Saint Kirill.
Yeah, exactly. Right? Now, Sava points out there was a debate in 11th century Constantinople about which of the Cappadocian fathers was the greatest. The people supported these fathers and even made factions. The debate became violent. There was a bishop, was a saint who got a vision where he was visited by all three of the Cappadocian fathers, who revealed they were all the greatest. Yep. Well, that's a great way to settle it. Why limit it to one? And on that note, we get our next question, which may be our last question. Do you consider yourselves Florinite or Matthewite? This is an interesting question. I consider, well, you want to go first, Vladika? Or?
Florinite in the technical sense that our hierarchical succession derives from Archbishop Leonti and Archbishop Seraphim and Archbishop Acacius. So in that technical sense. But we consider ourselves to be a Western Orthodox church. And I object too much to and definitely not Matthewite, but I object too much to the Florinite terms on various bases. So I mean, I'm not even sure, to be honest. Anyway, go ahead.
Yeah, because I'm not sure that that's necessarily a succession issue. A lot of people see it as a underlying philosophy issue. In which case, I would say that most of the true Orthodox Church, whether Florinite or Matthewite, tends towards what would be considered the Matthewite position. I consider both Chrysostomos of Florina and Matthew of Pristina to be saints. So I have a problem choosing either one. There have been periods in the church's history where sometimes two sides of a debate were both sainted. And in this case, they're trying to make a mockery of that with, Sergius of Moscow and my own namesake, and I don't think that's going to go through. But in the case of, Chrysostomos of Florina and Matthew of Pristina, I consider that there's a very valid case for that to be made, because Metropolitan Chrysostomos was, from his perspective, justly believing that there were new calendar bishops because of people he knew in the hierarchy, because he was well known, who were telling him that there was going to be a change. And from Bishop Matthew's position, just looking from the Christians in the streets that were getting persecuted, he would say that's impossible. So it's very possible that they were both right from what they were being told. And ultimately, miracles have been found at both graves. I don't consider myself either, because they're both holy people. Or maybe I consider us both. I don't know.
I would not consider our philosophically. I wouldn't consider ourselves bound by all the decisions of and statements of various Florinite leaders, or simply because We're bound by the orthodox doctrine of the church, all right, and the dogmatic teachings of the ecumenical council and the fathers. We're bound by the concomitant conclusions of that, which is that ecumenism is a heresy, and we anathematize it. We reject modernism; it's heretical. I mean, it's almost like asking after Acacius was consecrated a bishop in Chicago in Detroit in 1960, and then was he a Rokor bishop at that? Was he a bishop of the Russian tradition at that point because he was or Romanian tradition because he was consecrated by those two, or was he a continuation of the Greek tradition and he just had to go find episcopal consecration from a Russian and a Romanian bishop? So it depends on how you look at it. I mean, it's just
I think that unfortunately, and this is what is truly sad about any perceived division is that they're not taking all of that history into account as part of the heroic witness of the church. No, don't worry. We're not offended or anything.
Oh no, that's fine.
To apologize for.
No, I mean it's like Saint Meletius of Antioch. He was consecrated a bishop by Arians in Sebastia, outside of the Antiochian Patriarchate. He then gets elected Patriarch of Antioch, proclaims orthodoxy. So it's sort of like a little bit of those types of questions.
Yeah,
I think the main issue is if you simply simplify it down to that level. I could say, well, yeah, I think I could say something like, I think various Florinite writers had a greater historical sense about things, and that they were more accurate on many field on the general field in many areas than Bishop Matthew.
But still,
I would also say that when you deal with this issue, everything that happens from those positions is basically a repeat in some way or another of, let's say, views that were held in 19th century Greece. All right. So, like if I say, well, if a Matthewite or a Florinite says that they are the true Church of Greece, okay, well, are you the successor of the pre-1924 Church of Greece? And then, yes. Okay, so then you have to own pre-1924 history, and you have to explain all the problem. I mean, that's just a sincere way of going about it.
Right, and I think
when you do that, it doesn't. You have to adopt a wider view that doesn't amount to rejecting orthodoxy or embracing ecumenism. It means you have to realize there were problematic issues with two conclusive of a statement about some aspects of church history between two different synods in the 30s or something.
Yeah, to me it relates almost to the question of the better saint of the Cappadocian fathers, and in that I would just say, we're talking about two very heroic hierarchs who had very difficult times and spent a lot of their time confessing the faith, ultimately in prison. They're two good choices, and I wouldn't want to exclude either one.
Yeah, I mean, like, give you an example. Who was
Father Boniface is back on, so you may have a question.
Okay, so it's like we have Arsacius, Atticus, Socinian, like for example Arsacius of Constantinople, and all the people who died from roughly 40. When did St. John Chrysostom repose? Father Joseph. 407 unto 415. The Orthodox churches of the East and the West were not in communion. And that was because our ancestors, our people in the West, we had supported St. Chrysostom. And after St. Chrysostom died in exile, we said that we would not commune with any of the churches in the East that can either positively or passively assented to the deposition of St. Chrysostom. And the result is that there was a separation of these two Orthodox churches in the local church sense for about 8 years. All right. So there were people who died during that intervening period of time who were saints. Okay. So were they not? Are we suddenly going to say that they weren't saints? And I think that would be an absurd conclusion, because the church later, the communion was restored, and we recognized
we recognized all of them.
Right.
So I hope that answers that question, Blind G Tech, and thank you. And you have a great night and a good fast. Father Boniface, I see you're back.
Hello.
Hi there.
I'm having technical difficulties.
Okay. Did you have a
How's you?
question or no?
Not really. I just some of the comments that were made reminded me of a lot of German higher critical thought, and these guys are just nitpicking minor issues just to destroy the integrity of the scriptures and the integrity of the church. But that's just one I take from your conversation about a little while ago. But aside from that,
talking about with the whole the not recognizing like Saint Benedict was real and stuff like that.
yeah. That's just. I mean, in my Protestant seminary, we read Albert Schweitzer's *The Quest of Historical Jesus*, and they're just playing games, and they're mockers. That's what they are. They're mockers of Christ. And so, anyway, but I'm enjoying everything that you all are saying. So, but I've been having technical issues all night. So
it happens. It happens.
Well, Father Boniface is absolutely correct because remember, they're applying this pseudo-historical method where they have already the presupposition that God doesn't exist, and if he does exist, he doesn't intervene in history. It's essentially either deistic or atheistic assumptions. And if those are your assumptions, then you're going to get atheistic or deistic results. In other words, and they're false. But even this Francis Clark fellow, who has had to gradually backtrack on all these statements he's made. I mean, not completely backtrack, and they're never going to do that. I mean, for example, why would it be absurd to say Saint Gregory the Great could not have a conversation with Peter the Deacon about miracles? Why would, just because Saint Gregory gives exalted sermons, that doesn't mean he doesn't believe in the monastic saints and miraculous events? Because the Bible is the Holy Scriptures, he certainly affirmed those, and they're full of miraculous events. So it's it's on the face of it, it seems. Now, what is true, I can tell you this, is there has been tampering with one or two phrases of Book 2 of the Dialogues, and I have found there's at the very end of Book 2. Originally, it simply says, "And the Holy Ghost proceeds from the Father." All right. And abides in the Son. Okay, somebody later in the 9th century or so, or 8th century, added in the margins the filioque. That's an entirely different discussion, though. All right, but I can tell that's more of an issue of somebody adding something to a genuine text. Are you there, Father?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm gonna let you all talk. I gotta go because I gotta get.
We're actually gonna close up because I don't think there's any more questions. But in any case, I'm just going to say, well, first off, everyone, thank you for listening. Again, I hope you check out those articles on nftu.net.
Monday evening.
Come again?
Monday evening, we're going to release the first article.
Yeah, we're releasing a new members-only article, and that's going to include translations never before translated in any major text in the English language. So keep looking forward. We're looking forward to that, and we're going to keep on building. I am doing a broadcast on Wednesday, where and I was going to tell you about this, Ladika, basically where we were going to be. I was going to be talking to a Russian Substacker. We've talked about him before. He wanted to come on and talk about Russia and Marcionism.
Okay.
Yeah, that guy.
But
we're looking forward to it. I want to see what happens. I hope you're there, Vladika. I don't know if you'll make time. I know you're busy, but if possible,
I'll let you handle it.
Oh, great. Wonderful. Okay. And so again, nftu.net. You can find us on Twitter. You can find us on Gab. You can find our Discord. If you don't know how to find our Discord, just go to nftu.net and click on forum. And if there's nothing else, I'd like to thank everyone for being here, everyone with their questions, and everyone who participated. On the stream. And again, we'll be back. We'll be back, of course, for live questions and answers next week. And good night, everyone. And I hope your fast goes well. And benedicite.
Good night. Benedicite, Father Joseph, Father Boniface. Good night.